Hello, sleepy traveller. Tuck yourself in, dim the room, and prepare for a peaceful drift through uneventful history. We'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Drop a comment if you'd like to share. In the bustling heart of ancient Rome, where togas were the height of fashion and gladiators stole the show, there was another star that often goes uncelebrated, the Roman legal system. Trust me, it's a real page-turner. At the epicenter of this legal drama was the 12 Tables, Rome's very own law and order circa 450 BCE. These weren't just any old lists of do's and don'ts, they were the ultimate rulebook for Roman citizens, dictating everything from property rights to, believe it or not, the quality of your daily bread. Now, when we talk about ancient laws, we're not discussing the kind of courtroom antics you'd see on a primetime legal thriller. Instead, picture a set of rules so bizarre, they make modern legislation seem positively sane. Let's start with bread, that staple of life which, in Rome, was taken as seriously as a gladiator's fight to the death. The 12 Tables decreed that bread sold in the markets had to meet specific quality standards. If you were caught selling subpar loaves, you weren't just risking a bad Yelp review, you were facing serious legal consequences. This wasn't just about public health, it was about public pride. Romans believed that the quality of their bread reflected the quality of their civilization. Talk about having your values baked in. But bread wasn't the only daily essential scrutinized by Roman law. The 12 Tables also dipped into the morbid with regulations on funeral expenses. In a society where status was everything, even in death, the lawmakers decided to curb the habit of throwing extravagant funerals that could bankrupt a family faster than you can say Carthago delenda est. The law limited the number of mourners you could hire and the amount of gold that could be buried with the deceased. Yes, they actually had to make a rule about not burying too much bling with your dearly departed. It seems even the Romans understood that you can't take it with you. The 12 Tables were as much a social commentary as they were a legal code. They offered a glimpse into what Romans valued, feared, and found downright necessary to regulate. You might say they were ahead of their time, laying down the law on issues that still resonate today. Why else would bread quality be a legal matter, if not to ensure a content populace? And as for the funeral laws, they were a pragmatic solution to the very modern problem of keeping up appearances without going broke. Of course, these laws didn't just pop out of the Roman imagination like Athena from Zeus's forehead. They were born out of a struggle between the patricians and plebeians, Rome's own version of the haves and have-nots. The plebeians, tired of being bossed around by the patrician elite, demanded a written code to prevent those in power from making up laws on a whim. The 12 Tables were their answer, a compromise that gave all free Roman citizens a clear and sometimes peculiar set of guidelines to live by. It's fascinating to see how these ancient ordinances have echoes in today's legal systems, which, let's face it, are not immune to their own quirks. For instance, in the United States, there are still laws on the books about how many frogs you can have in your pocket, or whether you can walk a camel down the street in Nevada. While these may sound like the fevered dreams of a Roman lawmaker after a night of too much wine, they highlight how societies everywhere tend to get a bit carried away with legislating the minutiae of daily life. So, as we delve into the strange world of Roman laws, let's keep in mind the absurdities and the underlying wisdom they reveal. They show us the lengths to which Roman society would go to maintain order, preserve public dignity, and, above all, to ensure nobody was eating bad bread or throwing a pauper's funeral. In short, these laws were the bedrock upon which the sprawling empire was built, a testament to the Romans' obsession with order and their knack for overthinking life's simplest pleasures. As we dive further into the Roman Empire's legal labyrinth, let's turn our gaze from bread and burials to something a little more fashionable, public behaviour and attire. Now, if you thought modern dress codes were strict, wait till you hear about the Lex Oppia. Picture this. It was 25 BCE, and Rome was in the throes of the Second Punic War, fighting for its life against the legendary Hannibal. Soldiers were pouring their blood and sweat into maintaining the empire's glory, and what were the women of Rome doing? Spending their husbands' hard-earned denarii on the latest in toga fashion, or so the story goes. Enter Lex Oppia, a law as much about social order as it was about economic necessity, aimed squarely at women's wardrobes. It limited how much gold a woman could own to just half an ounce, about the weight of a modern AA battery. They were also forbidden from wearing multicolored garments or riding in carriages within a mile of Rome except during public religious ceremonies. It was essentially the Roman way of saying, hey, no flaunting your wealth while the Republic is at war. This wasn't just about restricting women, though. The Lex Oppia was a reflection of the times, a desperate attempt to conserve wealth and resources while the state was bleeding funds. It was a fiscal necessity masquerading as moral legislation. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, knew that keeping up appearances could drain the coffers faster than a chariot race. Sure, it might sound like an overbearing fashion faux pas, but it was Rome's way of ensuring the empire didn't collapse under the weight of its own opulence. Fast forward to 95 BCE, and the war was won, but the Lex Oppia still lingered like a bad fashion trend. Women, understandably, were not amused. They took to the streets in an unprecedented protest, demanding the repeal of the law. And here's where it gets juicy. The debate in the Senate was a verbal gladiator match worthy of its own epic. Cato the Elder, the ultimate grumpy old man of Roman politics, argued that luxury would ruin the state. But the law's opponents, like Lucius Valerius, countered that it was time to let the ladies sparkle a little. Spoiler alert, the women won, and the Lex Oppia was repealed, proving once again that even in ancient Rome, style had the power to make a statement. It's easy to romanticize this as a victory for women's rights, but let's not kid ourselves. The law's repeal was as much about economic recovery as it was about social justice. Rome's economy had bounced back post-war, and the lavish lifestyles of its citizens were seen as a sign of prosperity and stability. Besides, allowing women to spend freely meant more economic activity, a win for the merchants selling these luxurious goods. Essentially, Rome realized that a little bling could be good for business. The Lex Oppia saga gives us a glimpse into the intricate dance between power, fashion, and economics in ancient Rome. It's a reminder that laws, no matter how draconian or ridiculous they may seem, often have roots in the pragmatic concerns of the day. And while the Romans might not have had Instagram to flaunt their wealth, they certainly understood the power of a good ensemble to convey status and influence. This wasn't the only time Roman lawmakers played fashion police. There were other sumptuary laws, like the Lex Fania and Lex Didia, which aimed to curb extravagance in banquets. Because, of course, in Rome, even dinner parties could become a battleground for social status. These laws dictated how many guests one could invite and how much one could spend on a single meal, emphasizing the ever-present tension between luxury and restraint. It's as if the Romans knew that too much indulgence could lead to moral decay, or worse, an empty treasury. Yet, beneath these legal codes lay a society grappling with its own values. The Romans were a people who celebrated their achievements with the grandest spectacles, yet were keenly aware of the dangers of excess. They lived in a world where appearances mattered, a concept not entirely alien to our own times. But for them, it wasn't just about personal expression. It was about maintaining the delicate balance of power, wealth, and societal harmony. Thus, as we continue our exploration of Rome's legal oddities, remember that behind every bizarre law was a civilization trying to keep its empire from crumbling under its own weight. The Lex Oppia and its counterparts were not just about controlling fashion, they were about ensuring that the threads of Roman society didn't unravel. They reveal a culture that, much like ours, struggled with the age-old question: where do we draw the line between freedom and order, between celebration and excess? And while the Romans might have been a little more toga than t-shirt, their legal battles over social conduct remind us that the past, with all its eccentricities, is never as distant as it seems. And speaking of the delicate balance between indulgence and restraint, let's sink our teeth into another flavorful aspect of Roman society, their dietary regulations and food-related laws. Oh yes, the Romans didn't just legislate on fashion and funerals, they also had a thing or two to say about what went down at the dinner table. Picture a world where your evening plans could be thwarted by a Roman senator with a penchant for controlling your culinary choices. Welcome to the gastronomic gauntlet of ancient Rome. First off, let's talk about the Lex Fania, a law from 161 BCE that aimed to curb the excesses of Roman feasting. You see, the Romans had a knack for turning dinner into an Olympic sport, and their banquets could make Thanksgiving look like a modest affair. The Lex Fania put a cap on how much one could spend on a single meal, about 100 asses, or roughly the cost of a decent bottle of wine today. But who was counting? Well, the censors were, and they took their job very seriously. If you overindulged, you could face a hefty fine or, worse, a hit to your social standing. In a society where reputation was everything, a damaged reputation was like being unfriended by the entire empire. The Lex Fania was followed by the Lex Didia, which extended similar restrictions throughout Italy. Both laws were part of a broader effort to enforce moral discipline in a society that was seemingly drowning in its own opulence. These laws weren't just about saving money, they were about saving face. Romans were obsessed with public image, and a lavish feast was seen as a sign of moral decay. So, these regulations were Rome's way of keeping its citizens from eating their way into ignominy. But let's not pretend these laws were foolproof. Like any good loophole, the Romans found ways to wriggle out of these restrictions. This is where the magic of the Roman market came into play. Ever the pragmatists, Romans turned to private dining clubs, a precursor to our modern supper clubs. These gatherings skirted the laws by sharing the costs among members. It was the ancient version of going Dutch. And if that wasn't enough, hosts would often serve several courses, each under the legal limit, but together forming a feast that rivaled the gods' own banquets. Crafty, right? And yet, despite the legal gymnastics, these laws did reflect a genuine concern for economic stability. The Romans understood that excessive consumption could lead to inflation and scarcity. They knew that if everyone decided to throw an epic bash every weekend, the price of peacock tongues and dormice pâté, yes, those were real menu items, would skyrocket. Sound familiar? It's not too different from today's avocado toast debates and the concerns about the gentrification of food markets. Public feasting wasn't just about the food, it was about power and prestige. The more lavish the spread, the more influential the host appeared. It was a culinary arms race, with each host trying to outdo the last. And in this race, everyone was a contestant except the slaves who, ironically, prepared these extravagant meals but weren't allowed to partake in them. Talk about cooking up a storm without tasting the rain. The Romans were nothing if not resourceful. When laws tried to curb their appetites, they found creative ways to keep the party going. And this brings us to the market regulations, because controlling the feast meant controlling the market. The Romans implemented price controls on essential items like grain and olive oil. The annona, a state-controlled grain supply system, was their ace in the hole. It ensured that the bread baskets of Rome remained full, even when times were tough. And let's face it, in Rome, a hungry populace was a recipe for rebellion. These measures were not just about filling bellies, they were a strategic move to maintain social order. A well-fed citizen was a happy citizen, or at least a less riotous one. So, when the grain supply was threatened, the state would intervene, sometimes subsidizing the cost or distributing free grain to the needy. It was a nifty way to keep the peace and avoid the wrath of a hangry mob. In today's world, where the farm-to-table movement and organic markets reign supreme, it's interesting to see how the Romans managed their own food supply. Their laws reveal a society that understood the intricate dance between abundance and austerity. They knew that too much feast could lead to famine, so they legislated accordingly. And while their methods might seem draconian by today's standards, they were, at their core, about survival and stability. The Romans' obsession with food laws shows us a culture that was both indulgent and disciplined. They celebrated the bounty of their empire, but were acutely aware of the dangers of excess. Their laws were a reflection of this duality, a constant tug-of-war between the desire for more and the need for restraint. So, as we digest these culinary chronicles, let's remember that Rome's approach to food was as much about politics as it was about pleasure. The laws they enacted reveal a society striving to balance its appetites with its ambitions, a lesson perhaps as relevant today as it was in the shadow of the Colosseum. And as we look forward to exploring more of Rome's legal labyrinth, let's keep in mind that, behind each regulation, was a civilization attempting to savor the good life without losing its grip on reality. With bellies full, and a society striving to maintain its grip on the good life, the Romans turned their attention to another staple of public contentment, entertainment. Enter the world of Roman spectacles, where the roar of the crowd was matched only by the labyrinthine laws governing their enjoyment. If you thought today's entertainment industry was a regulatory quagmire, try navigating the ancient equivalent of health and safety laws with the added twist of ensuring no one gets literally stabbed. Let's start with the theatre, the Roman version of binge-watching your favourite drama. The Lex Rossia, Enacted in 67 BCE, was a law that would have made even the most ardent theatre critic raise an eyebrow. It reserved the first 14 rows in the theatre for the equites, Rome's middle class with just enough wealth to demand VIP seating. This wasn't just about giving the well-heeled a prime view of the stage. It was a calculated move to reinforce social hierarchies in a setting where masks and roles could blur identities. And here's where it gets interesting. The theatre was a place of both cultural enrichment and moral suspicion. Roman elites were wary of the potential for plays to corrupt the masses, or worse, incite unrest. Theatres, you see, were hotbeds of political commentary, where a clever playwright could slip in a jab or two at the powers that be. It was a delicate balance, encourage the arts but avoid a revolution. Cue the censors, who would have been the ancient equivalent of the MPAA, ensuring that nothing too risque or seditious made it to the stage. The Lex Rossia also highlights how the Romans used legislation to control not just who got to enjoy the entertainment, but how it was consumed. Compare this with modern-day age restrictions on movies, or the ever-debated topic of censorship in media. It's a reminder that while the mediums may change, the impulse to regulate remains a constant. Now, if you thought the theatre had its quirks, the gladiatorial games were a whole different beast, literally. These weren't just sporting events, they were political tools, social events, and, let's be honest, a bit of a bloodbath. Gladiators were the athletes of their time, fighting for glory, freedom, or, at least, a reprieve from their otherwise grim existence. But behind the clamour of the crowd and the glint of the arena's sand lay a complex web of laws designed to manage everything from the number of games held to how the fighters were treated. Take the gladiatorial munera, the public games funded by wealthy sponsors. These events were as much about politics as they were about entertainment. Politicians often bankrolled games to curry favour with the masses, a practice not too dissimilar from modern-day politicians kissing babies or taking selfies with constituents. But Rome's lawmakers, wary of the potential for such spectacles to bankrupt the state or incite chaos, imposed restrictions on the frequency and scale of these events. Enter the Lex Tullia of 63 BCE, which limited the number of gladiators a politician could sponsor during an election year. It was the ancient version of campaign finance reform, aimed at curbing excessive spending and preventing any one politician from gaining too much influence through sheer spectacle. It's a telling commentary on the Roman understanding of power and persuasion. Give the people bread and circuses, but not so much that they forget who's in charge. In terms of economic context, the games were an industry unto themselves, employing everyone from trainers to armourers. The cost of staging these events could run into the hundreds of thousands of sesterces, a staggering sum that made them both a significant economic driver and a potential financial sinkhole. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, understood that even the most thrilling spectacle needed to be sustainable. Otherwise, you'd end up with a stadium full of angry spectators and an empty treasury, a combo no emperor wanted to face. And while the games themselves were a spectacle of violence, the treatment of the gladiators was a study in contradictions. On the one hand, they were slaves, trained to kill or be killed for the amusement of the crowd. On the other, successful gladiators could attain celebrity status, earning both freedom and fortune. It was a brutal meritocracy, where skill and survival could elevate a man from the depths of despair to the heights of Roman society. Yet the harsh reality remained. For every victor, many more fell in the dust. This brings us to a darker element of Roman entertainment, the manipulation of public opinion through spectacle. Games were meticulously staged to align with political agendas, distract from societal issues, or simply keep the populace entertained, and thus docile. The phrase bread and circuses captures this perfectly, a strategy not lost on modern governments who understand the power of a good distraction when the going gets tough. But let's not romanticize the gladiatorial games as merely thrilling duels. They were a grim reminder of Rome's reliance on violence as both entertainment and a tool of social cohesion. The games served as a release valve for societal tensions, channeling aggression away from the political sphere and into the arena. It was a risky gamble, keep the populace entertained to maintain order, but ensure the spectacle doesn't become the spark of unrest. So, as we pull back the curtain on Rome's entertainment laws, we see a society that was both captivated and controlled by spectacle. The Romans knew that in a world filled with bread, wine, and the occasional lion, The theatre and arena were stages not just for plays and fights, but for the very drama of life itself. They reveal a culture acutely aware of the thin line between order and chaos, where the roar of the crowd could either uphold the empire or herald its downfall. In this exploration of Roman laws, we find a civilization that understood the power of entertainment to shape societal norms and political landscapes. They reveal a people who, much like us, grappled with the balance between freedom and control, between indulgence and restraint. And as we continue to uncover the layers of Rome's legal labyrinth, let's remember that behind every law was a society striving to entertain, enthrall, and ultimately endure. So, as the curtain falls on the spectacle of Roman entertainment, one might wonder, what's the lasting legacy of these peculiar laws? How have they shaped the world we know today? And, perhaps most importantly, what do they tell us about the Romans themselves, those toga-wearing architects of Western civilization who left behind a legal labyrinth as bizarre as it was brilliant? Let's start with the enduring influence of these ancient laws on modern legal systems. While you probably won't find a statute today regulating the number of mourners at your funeral or limiting your gold jewelry to half an ounce, the Roman emphasis on codification and transparency has stood the test of time. Think about it. The 12 Tables laid the groundwork for legal systems that still value written laws as a bulwark against arbitrary rule. This wasn't about compiling a list of do's and don'ts. It was about creating a society where people knew the rules of the game, even if some of those rules involved regulating bread quality and fashion faux pas. And what about the economic impact? Rome's laws, as strange as they might appear now, were often grounded in fiscal reality. Take the Lex Oppia, that infamous legislation limiting women's bling during wartime. It wasn't just a patriarchal power play, it was a strategic maneuver to conserve resources at a time when Rome was stretched thinner than a centurion's sandal strap. Fast forward to today, and you'll notice that economic pragmatism still shapes legislation. Governments around the globe impose austerity measures in tough times, much like Rome did with its sumptuary laws. The basic idea remains, when the coffers are running low, it's time to tighten the purse strings, even if it means curbing your enthusiasm for peacock tongues or multicolored togas. Now, let's dig into the social dynamics. Roman laws were as much about maintaining social order as they were about justice. The Lex Rossia, with its VIP theatre seating, wasn't just a nod to the equite status, it was a vivid reminder of the rigid class structures that defined Rome. Today, while we might not have legal codes dictating who sits where in a theatre, the echoes of class-based privileges still reverberate through our societies. The Romans were acutely aware of the power of appearances, a sentiment that's as relevant in today's boardrooms as it was in the bustling forums of ancient Rome. It's also worth questioning the myth of Roman legal fairness. Sure, the 12 Tables were a landmark in legal history, but they were far from perfect. They were born from a struggle between patricians and plebeians, Rome's own version of the 1% versus the 99%. While the written code provided some checks on patrician power, it was hardly a blueprint for a fair society. Consider the fact that these laws applied primarily to free citizens, leaving slaves and non-citizens out in the cold. The reality of Roman law was as stratified as the society it governed, a point worth pondering as we grapple with inequalities in our own legal systems today. And let's not forget the humour intertwined with these laws. The Romans, with their love for satire and sharp wit, likely saw the absurdity in some of their regulations. Even in the strictures of the Lex Fania, one can sense a wry acknowledgement of humanity's penchant for indulgence. It's almost as if they were saying, we know you love a good feast, but let's not eat our way into oblivion. This blend of pragmatism and humour offers a timeless lesson. Laws shape society, but culture gives them flavour. So, what's the takeaway from our Roman legal journey? At its core, it's a story of a civilization striving to balance order and chaos, indulgence and restraint. The Romans understood that laws weren't just about punishment, they were about preserving the very fabric of society. They knew that behind every regulation, no matter how strange, lay a narrative about what mattered most to their people. In the end, the legacy of Roman law is a testament to the complexity of human nature. It's about the interplay between power, economics, and society that continues to shape our world today. Whether it's the modern struggle for economic equity or the quest for social justice, the echoes of Rome's legal system remind us that the past, is never truly past. It lingers in the laws we live by, the values we hold dear, and the peculiarities we can't quite shake off. As we wrap up this exploration of Roman legal oddities, let's tip our hats, or togas, to the Romans for giving us a window into their world. It was a world that grappled with many of the same issues we face today, albeit with a few more gladiators and considerably less internet. And while we may chuckle at the thought of laws about bread quality or funeral bling, these regulations reveal a society that took its responsibilities seriously, even when those responsibilities involved ensuring that nobody was buried with too many gold coins. So next time you hear about an odd law or a strange regulation, remember that behind it might lie a story just as fascinating as those of ancient Rome, a story of a society trying, with varying degrees of success, to make sense of its own complexities. And perhaps, in understanding these stories, we'll find new ways to navigate our own legal labyrinths, armed with the lessons of history and a healthy dose of humour. In a world where the closest thing to a Kindle was the flickering glow of a candle, medieval Europe saw the birth of something rather extraordinary, the Illuminated manuscript. These weren't just any ordinary books. They were the kind of books that would make a modern art director weep with envy. Think of them as the original coffee table books, luxury items meant to impress, dazzle, and occasionally make you forget that half a kingdom was probably starving outside the abbey walls. So, who were the unsung heroes behind these masterpieces? Monks. Yes, those same guys who took vows of silence, presumably so they wouldn't complain too much about their aching backs after hours of hunching over a desk. Picture these medieval desk jockeys in their scriptoriums, fancy word for writing rooms, but let's not get too carried away with romanticism here. These weren't plush offices with ergonomic chairs. No. Monks sat on simple benches, bearing the brunt of medieval ergonomics, which is to say, none at all. The process was as painstaking as it was fascinating. First, you start with an animal skin. Not just any old raggedy hide, mind you. We're talking about parchment or vellum made from the skin of calves, sheep or goats. And if you think your modern art supplies are expensive, consider this. A single book could require the skins of up to 300 sheep. That's a lot of barring for your buck. Once the parchment was ready, after being soaked, stretched and scraped cleaner than a monk's conscience, it was time for the real fun to begin. Scribes would carefully inscribe the text, often in Latin, because why make things easy? Then came the illuminators, the rock stars of the medieval manuscript world. They added the bling, using gold leaf and vibrant pigments that were sometimes more precious than the gold itself. Lapis lazuli, for instance, was a deep blue pigment that had to be imported all the way from Afghanistan, making it more expensive than a modern influencer's skincare routine. But why go to all this trouble? Surely, reading by candlelight was hard enough without having to squint at elaborate flourishes and miniature scenes. The answer, as is often the case, lies in power and prestige. For medieval monasteries, these manuscripts were more than just books, they were status symbols. Owning an illuminated manuscript was like having a private jet parked out back, a testament to wealth, power, and a divine sort of literacy. Yet, the allure of these manuscripts wasn't just about flexing ecclesiastical muscles. They played a crucial role in preserving knowledge. In an era where a library could go up in flames because of one careless monk with a candle, these manuscripts were the vaults of human understanding. Religious texts, scientific treatises, and even philosophical debates were meticulously copied and illuminated, ensuring that knowledge would survive even if half the continent was busy waging war over who had the fanciest pope hat. Of course, the idea of monks quietly labouring away in solitude has its own romantic appeal. But the truth is, these scriptoriums were more like the collaborative open office spaces of their day. Except instead of free coffee and awkward team-building exercises, you had the constant risk of ink spills and the relentless pressure of perfection. A single mistake could mean starting over, and considering how long it took to prepare each sheet of parchment, that was a nightmare scenario on par with accidentally hitting reply all on a sensitive email. To understand the full impact of these manuscripts, consider this. By the time the printing press rolled around in the mid-15th century, it's estimated there were around 30,000 handwritten books in Europe. That might not sound like much in our digital age of instant downloads, but for medieval times, it was a veritable treasure trove of knowledge. And while the printing press would eventually democratize information in ways those humble monks could never have imagined, it's worth tipping a hat, preferably a medieval one with a jaunty feather, to the tireless scribes and illuminators who laid the groundwork, one painstakingly illuminated page at a time. So, the next time you swipe your e-reader, spare a thought for those medieval monks hunched over their desks, painstakingly creating art that would outlast empires. It's a legacy written not in stone, but in the delicate, shimmering glow of illuminated manuscript pages. And speaking of legacies, let's dive headfirst into the medieval world, where illuminated manuscripts weren't just cultural artifacts, they were economic powerhouses and social chess pieces. Picture a society where owning a book was like flashing the keys to a Ferrari before the age of internal combustion. These manuscripts were the bling of the Middle Ages, and their creation was a high-stakes game of who's got the most gold. So, what kind of cash are we talking here? Well, first, let's break down the materials. We've already touched on the sheep-to-page transformation, but let's not gloss over the cost. The parchment alone was a wallet drainer. Transforming an innocent barnyard animal into a pristine writing surface took skill, time, and a fair chunk of change. A single manuscript could demand the skins of hundreds of animals, and that's before you even got to the inks and gold leaf. Now, let's get into the pigments, which were a veritable who's who of the medieval bling ring. Lapis lazuli, a rich blue pigment, was a literal jewel in the crown of manuscript illumination. Imported from Afghanistan, it was worth more than its weight in gold. Imagine ordering your paint supplies from halfway across the known world just to add some blue to your pages. Talk about dedication to the craft. And gold leaf. Well, if you've ever seen a medieval manuscript, you know they didn't skimp on the shinies. That gold wasn't just for show, it was a statement. It was like saying, I'm so rich, I can afford to put gold on my book pages. This was the medieval equivalent of gold plating your toilet, because nothing screams, I've made it, quite like reading from a page that gleams like the sun. But why go to such excessive lengths? Because in medieval Europe, a manuscript was more than just a book, it was a declaration of wealth and piety rolled into one. Commissioning an illuminated manuscript was a way to announce your standing to the world, like buying a luxury yacht to host a charity gala. The church, naturally, was the biggest player in this game. Monasteries and cathedrals poured resources into their collections. A wealthy patron could donate a lavishly decorated manuscript to a church, ensuring eternal gratitude and hopefully a cushier spot in the afterlife. The economics didn't stop there. The creation of these books was an industry. Scribes and illuminators were the artisans of their day, and they didn't come cheap. A skilled scribe was like a rock star coder in Silicon Valley, worth every penny for their ability to turn out flawless script. An illuminator, meanwhile, could command prices that would make a modern graphic designer blush. Their work was meticulous, requiring precision and creativity, turning plain text into a visual feast. Then there were the commissions. These weren't just friendly deals sealed with a handshake. They were complex contracts involving negotiations and, occasionally, some serious haggling. A wealthy patron commissioning a manuscript could hand over a sum that would make a king's ransom look like pocket change. The cost of commissioning a single manuscript could be equivalent to buying a small village. Perhaps a bit extravagant, but hey, when in Rome or medieval Europe. But it wasn't just the religious institutions at the helm. Secular rulers got in on the action too. Kings, queens, and nobles saw these manuscripts as essential to their libraries and, by extension, their legacy. They'd commission elaborate books to commemorate weddings, treaties, or the odd conquest. These books were part of the royal propaganda machine, showcasing the might and wisdom of their patrons. And let's be honest, if you had the choice between a bland political speech and a dazzling illuminated manuscript singing your praises, which would you choose? Now, don't be fooled by the romantic notion of these books existing purely for the love of art and knowledge. The truth is, many of these manuscripts were about as much about love as a political marriage. It's all about power and leverage. They were tools of influence, as much as they were repositories of knowledge. Having a well-stocked library of illuminated manuscripts was like having a nuclear arsenal of information. It could sway opinions, cement alliances, and even intimidate rivals. The production of these manuscripts also tells us a lot about the medieval economy. It was a world where trade routes stretched from Europe to the Middle East and beyond. The demand for exotic pigments and other materials fueled trade and brought wealth to merchants. The production process was a microcosm of the medieval economy at large, a web of commerce, craftsmanship, and class. So, next time you pick up a glossy magazine or scroll through an influencer's curated feed, remember that the medieval elite were doing much the same, weaving their status into glowing pages, one illuminated manuscript at a time. What they created wasn't just art, but a testament to an era where books were as much about showing off as they were about showing knowledge. And while we might scoff at their extravagance, let's be real. Who wouldn't want a little gold leaf in their life, if only to remind the neighbours of who's really running the show? As we dive deeper into this tapestry of gilded pages and political manoeuvring, it becomes evident that illuminated manuscripts were the medieval equivalent of a social media status update, only with a slightly longer production time and a touch more permanence. Let's peel back the layers of this opulent onion and examine how these manuscripts were wielded like literary Excaliburs in the battle for influence and prestige. First up in this parade of power players are the patrons, the folks who bankrolled these mini-miracles of ink and gold. Picture the medieval rich and famous, kings, queens, bishops, and an assortment of nobles who wouldn't blink at dropping what could be an entire kingdom's GDP on a single dazzling book. Take Charles V of France, for example. By the end of his reign in 1380, his library housed over 900 volumes, a collection that would make even the most dedicated bibliophile weep with envy. Charles wasn't just collecting for kicks, he was building a legacy, using books as bricks to fortify his intellectual empire. But it wasn't just royalty flipping through these pages like they were thumbing through a particularly posh yearbook. Religious leaders were major patrons too. The Church had long understood the persuasive power of a well-illuminated manuscript. These books were their sermons in gold and blue, a splashy testament to divine authority. Consider the Winchester Bible, commissioned by Henry of Blois, a bishop whose appetite for grandeur was as vast as his holdings. This masterpiece is a testament to how the Church wielded books not just as tools of worship, but as symbols of ecclesiastical clout. Now, let's sprinkle in some international flavour. Across the Channel, England's Richard II was another monarch who knew the value of a good book. His patronage of the arts wasn't just about personal enjoyment. It was a strategic move to bolster his image as a cultured and legitimate ruler. He commissioned works like the Wilton diptych, a portable altarpiece that, while not a manuscript, shared the same purpose, to project an image of piety and power. And then there were the women, often overlooked in this testosterone-fueled manuscript arms race. Yet, figures like Margaret of York and Christine de Pizan were influential patrons in their own right. Margaret, a duchess whose marital alliances stretched from Burgundy to England, commissioned manuscripts that were both politically astute and gorgeously adorned. Meanwhile, Christine de Pizan, a writer and intellectual powerhouse, used her pen to advocate for women's rights, commissioning manuscripts that challenged the male-dominated narratives of her time. But let's not kid ourselves. These patrons weren't just in it for the love of illuminated art. The manuscripts were power moves, pure and simple. They created a visual narrative that painted these patrons as wise, devout, and, above all, powerful. Imagine flipping through a manuscript that not only extols your virtues, but does so with such flair that even your enemies can't help but be impressed. It's like having your own PR firm, with each page a press release crafted in shimmering gold. And these books didn't just stay neatly on shelves, gathering medieval dust. They travelled. Manuscripts were gifted to seal alliances, sweeten diplomatic deals, or secure marriages. They were the medieval equivalent of a diplomatic gift basket, only instead of wine and cheese, you had a piece of high art that could sway a court's opinion. Take the Très Riches Ouvrages du Duc de Berry, commissioned by John, Duke of Berry. This manuscript, renowned for its beautiful calendar illustrations, was as much a political tool as it was a work of art, showcasing the Duke's wealth and taste to anyone lucky enough to lay eyes on it. Yet, for all their grandeur, illuminated manuscripts were also a double-edged sword. The cost of production was astronomical, and commissioning one could strain even the deepest coffers. It was a gamble, a financial leap of faith that the prestige would outweigh the expenditure. And then there was the risk of obsolescence. In a world where power dynamics shifted faster than you could say excommunication, Yesterday's illuminated triumph could become today's forgotten footnote. But let's not let the romantic glow of these manuscripts completely blind us to their darker side. In the cutthroat world of medieval politics, these books could be as dangerous as they were dazzling. A manuscript that celebrated a ruler's victories could quickly turn into a liability if political winds changed. Consider the fate of Richard II, whose downfall was as dramatic as any illuminated scene. His commissioned works, once symbols of his grandeur, became reminders of his lost reign, relics of a past no longer celebrated. This is where the myth meets reality. We love the idea of illuminated manuscripts as pure art, but they were just as much about power plays and politics. They were tools of manipulation, wielded by those savvy enough to recognize their potential. And in the grand chess game of medieval Europe, these manuscripts were the queens on the board, capable of moving across the landscape of power with breathtaking agility. So, what have we learnt on this journey through the illuminated corridors of medieval power? That, in a world lit by flickering candles and the occasional bonfire, these manuscripts were the neon signs of their age. They shouted, whispered, and sometimes screamed the ambitions of their patrons, weaving stories that were as much about the authors as the subjects. In the end, illuminated manuscripts weren't just books. They were the embodiment of a time when knowledge was power, and power was, quite literally, illuminated. And so, as we flip the page on the last chapter of our illuminated adventure, it's time to peel back the gilded veneer and take a peek behind the scriptorium's curtain. Forget the image of the solitary monk, haloed by candlelight, labouring in saintly solitude. The reality was a bit more like a medieval co-working space, minus the artisanal lattes and open-plan seating. First, let's tackle the myth of the lone monk. Imagine a bustling workshop filled with scribes, illuminators, and binders, all working together in a symphony of scribbling, painting, and binding. This was no monastic solo act. In fact, these workshops could resemble the hustle and bustle of a modern creative agency. Just swap out the Macs for manuscripts and the beanbags for benches. The production of a single book could involve a whole team of specialists, each with their own role in the process. Monks might have started the tradition, but by the height of the manuscript's popularity, secular scribes and artisans were in on the action too. And speaking of action, let's talk about the mistakes. Oh yes, our medieval scribes weren't infallible. They were human after all, prone to the same slip-ups and blunders we all make. Take the infamous case of the monk who, presumably after one too many late nights, accidentally wrote a bit of wine instead of a bit of wisdom. A Freudian slip if there ever was one, and a reminder that even the most pious could get their priorities a little mixed up. Then there's the delightful world of marginalia, the doodles and notes scribbled in the margins of these manuscripts. Far from the solemnity of the main text, these little gems often reveal a more mischievous side of the scribes. Think cats chasing mice, knights battling snails, or even cheeky caricatures of their fellow monks. It's like the medieval version of doodling in the margins of your high school notebook, only with a bit more flair and a lot more historical value. Now, why the collaboration? Well, if you've ever tried to handwrite an entire book, you'll know it's not exactly a one-person job. The sheer labour involved demanded a team effort. A single manuscript could take months, even years, to complete. The Book of Kells, one of the most famous manuscripts, is thought to have taken the better part of a century to finish. That's a long time to be stuck at your desk without a coffee break. The economics of it all was staggering. The cost of commissioning a manuscript was akin to buying a small mansion, or, in some cases, a rather large one. You needed not just the raw materials, but the manpower. Each scribe, illuminator, and binder had to be paid, and their skills didn't come cheap. It's said that some illuminators were paid in gold, which is fitting considering they were often tasked with applying it to the pages. But let's not forget the scriptorium itself, the beating heart of manuscript production. These were often attached to monasteries, but not exclusively so. By the 13th century, commercial scriptoria had sprung up in urban centres, catering to the growing demand from universities and wealthy patrons. This was the medieval publishing industry in full swing, a precursor to the literary giants of the Renaissance. The collaborative nature of these workshops also meant that innovation could flourish. Techniques for mixing pigments, binding books, and even creating new styles of script were shared and refined. This was a world where knowledge was power, and power was shared, at least among those who knew where to look. And let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer artistry involved. The Illuminators, in particular, were the rock stars of the manuscript world. Their work was as much about creativity as it was about craftsmanship. They had to have an eye for detail that would make an art critic swoon, and the patience of a saint to boot. The pigments they used were sourced from across the known world, each with its own preparation process. If you've ever tried to mix the perfect shade of indigo, imagine doing it with crushed lapis lazuli and a mortar and pestle. But let's return to those marginalia for a moment, because they offer a fascinating glimpse into the minds of the scribes themselves. These weren't just random doodles, they were a form of expression, a way for the scribes to leave their mark, literally, on the pages. They could be humorous, satirical, or even political, offering a running commentary on the world outside the scriptorium's walls. In an age where official records were often sanitized and sterile, these little sketches are a breath of fresh air, a reminder that history is made up of real people with real personalities. So, where does this leave our solitary monk? Well, like many a historical figure, he's been somewhat misunderstood. Sure, there were times when a monk or two might have worked alone, but the grand enterprise of manuscript production was far from a lonely pursuit. It was a collaborative effort, a testament to the power of teamwork long before anyone thought to write a tedious business book about it. In the end, the myth and the reality both have their charm. The idea of the lone monk toiling away in silence is romantic, sure, but the truth is far more interesting. It's a story of collaboration, creativity, and, yes, a little bit of chaos. So next time you imagine a medieval scriptorium, picture a lively workshop full of scribes and illuminators, each bringing their skills to the table, and maybe, just maybe, leaving a cheeky doodle or two in the margins. After all, what's history without a little humour? And now we find ourselves at the crossroads of history and modernity, where the legacy of illuminated manuscripts shimmers like gold leaf under candlelight. Let's not kid ourselves. These medieval marvels weren't just about brightening up a monk's day, they were the ancestors of modern branding, the original influences of the art world, and today they continue to cast a long, illustrious shadow over our creative endeavours. Fast forward to the 21st century, where we've traded quills for styluses and parchment for pixels. Yet, the impact of illuminated manuscripts is everywhere if you know where to look. Look no further than the world of graphic design. The intricate details and vibrant compositions that once graced the pages of medieval manuscripts serve as inspiration for everything from book covers to digital interfaces. Designers today borrow the same principles of balance, colour, and storytelling that medieval illuminators mastered centuries ago. And let's not forget the typography, those beautifully ornate letters that still influence modern fonts, reminding us that the art of the scribe is far from obsolete. But the influence doesn't stop at design. Take a stroll through any major art museum, and you'll see the echoes of illuminated manuscripts resonating down the halls. Contemporary artists draw inspiration from these ancient texts, weaving their themes of spirituality, knowledge, and power into modern masterpieces. The use of mixed media, the juxtaposition of text and image, and the play with light and shadow are all nods to the techniques perfected in medieval scriptoria. And what about the digital age? As technology advances, so does our means of storytelling. Interactive e-books and immersive digital experiences owe a debt to the narrative traditions of illuminated manuscripts. Just as medieval illuminators sought to captivate with colour and imagery, digital creators today harness the power of interactivity to engage their audience. Virtual reality, augmented reality, and interactive storytelling. These are the new illuminated manuscripts, taking the art of storytelling into realms that even the most visionary monk couldn't have imagined. The connection between the past and present might seem tenuous, but peel back the layers and you'll find a shared pursuit, the quest to merge art and technology. Today, as AI-generated art and digital installations become the norm, we're reminded that the intersection of creativity and technology isn't a new phenomenon. Our medieval forebears were doing much the same, albeit with less bandwidth and more candle wax. They laid the groundwork for the digital artists of today, proving that innovation and artistry are timeless bedfellows. Now, let's talk economics, because what's art without a bit of cold, hard cash? Just as illuminated manuscripts were luxury items in medieval times, the art forms they've inspired often carry a hefty price tag. High-end graphic design, original artworks, and cutting-edge digital experiences are the gold leaf of today, driving industries and fueling economies. The creative economy, valued at over $2 trillion globally, owes a nod to those early artisans who turned calfskin and pigment into something priceless. So, what lessons can we glean from this luminous lineage? For starters, it's a testament to the enduring power of human creativity. No matter the era, people have always found ways to express themselves, tell stories, and leave a mark on the world. The Illuminated manuscripts remind us that the blend of art and technology is not just a contemporary trend, but a timeless pursuit. Whether it's a monk with a quill or a designer with a tablet, the drive to create is a fundamental part of human nature. And let's not forget the power of collaboration. Just as the creation of a manuscript was a team effort, so too are the great creative endeavours of today. The scriptorium has evolved into the modern creative studio, where artists, designers and technologists work hand in hand to push the boundaries of what's possible. It's a reminder that while the tools may change, the spirit of innovation endures. In the end, the legacy of Illuminated manuscripts is a vivid tapestry woven through time, a testament to the enduring allure of beauty, knowledge and human endeavour. As we flip the final page on this chapter of history, let's take a moment to appreciate the shimmering thread that connects us to the past. From the flickering candlelit scriptoriums of medieval Europe to the glowing screens of today, the story of Illuminated manuscripts is a story of human creativity at its finest, a reminder that some legacies are truly timeless. So, the next time you find yourself mesmerized by a piece of art or lost in the pages of a book, remember the monks and artisans who started it all, and maybe, just maybe, tip your hat to the past, acknowledging that while technology may change, the heart of human creativity beats on. Long before modern fashionistas started draping themselves in organic cotton and ethically sourced alpaca wool, the ancient Peruvians were weaving textiles so fine they could make today's couture look like a last-minute H&M sale rack. We're talking about the kind of craftsmanship that comes from 5,000 years of practice. Yes, you heard that right. 5 millennia of perfecting the art of making threads from plants and animals that didn't even need a PR team to make them cool. Take Huaca Prieta, for example. This ancient site is like the Louvre of early textile art, housing cotton fragments that date back to around 3000 BCE. That's older than the Great Pyramids and Stonehenge. Ancient Peruvians were already at the loom when folks elsewhere were still figuring out how to stack rocks. These people had skills. They were working with cotton before it was a twinkle in any ancient Egyptian's eye. And we're not talking about your average cotton swath either. The Huaca Prieta cotton was dyed using natural pigments that could put modern, eco-friendly dyes to shame. These were textiles that told stories, symbolized status, and sometimes even wrapped up the dead with more care than most of us fold our laundry. Now, let's talk alpacas. These fluffy creatures weren't just there to look adorable, though they do that exceptionally well. Alpacas were the ancient Peruvian equivalent of a Swiss army knife. They provided soft, durable wool that was not only luxurious but practical for the high-altitude Andean climate. And while today's Instagram influencers might wear alpaca wool to score ethical fashion points, the ancient Peruvians used it because it was the sensible choice. This was wool that could keep you warm while you were out herding more of those valuable furballs or trekking through the mountains. Plus, the stuff was water-resistant, which is a big deal when you're living in a place where the weather can change faster than a chameleon on a rainbow. The weaving techniques themselves were nothing short of engineering marvels. If you've ever tried to knit a scarf and ended up with something that looked more like a tangled mess than a cozy accessory, you'll appreciate the sheer genius of these ancient artisans. They developed complex methods using backstrap looms, which are about as straightforward as they sound, a loom strapped to your back. This portable setup allowed them to create intricate patterns and designs that would make even your grandmother's most elaborate crochet doilies pale in comparison. And remember, they did all this without YouTube tutorials or Pinterest boards for guidance. But why all this effort? What made textiles such a big deal in ancient Peru? Well, for one, they weren't just for wearing. Textiles were a form of currency, a medium for storytelling, and a symbol of power. The more elaborate your cloth, the higher your status. In some cases, textiles were even used in religious ceremonies, as offerings to the gods to ensure a good harvest or to protect against natural disasters. So, While today you might hang on to that designer scarf because you paid way too much for it, back then, a well-crafted textile could mean the difference between life and death. Now, let's not get too romantic about it. It's easy to imagine these weavers as serene artists, weaving away in sun-dappled workshops, but the reality was more like a high-stakes startup environment. There was pressure to perform, to innovate, to produce textiles that would meet the demands of a society that valued them immensely. And while we're all about celebrating the beauty of their work, let's not forget these artisans were also human. They had off days, probably cursed their looms when the threads tangled, and maybe even dreamed of a future where they wouldn't have to weave their livelihood one meticulous thread at a time. In the end, the ancient Peruvians weren't just making clothes, they were creating a legacy. They took natural resources and turned them into art, economy, and social structure, all woven together with skill and creativity that has stood the test of time. So next time you throw on that mass-produced sweater, spare a thought for the weavers of ancient Peru who knew the true value of a well-crafted textile long before fashion was a click away. And speaking of legacy, let's unravel the tapestry of ancient Peru's textile industry, an economic powerhouse that could make today's Wall Street look like amateur hour at a local farmer's market. Picture this. Textiles were to ancient Peru what Silicon Valley is to modern tech, innovative, indispensable, and just a little bit magical. This wasn't just about making clothes, it was about driving an entire economy with the flair of a Broadway production. First off, let's talk cold hard cash, or rather, the lack thereof. In a world without coins or bills, the ancient Peruvians got creative with their currency. Textiles were the original Bitcoin, but unlike Bitcoin, you could actually wrap yourself up in these assets on a chilly Andean night. This barter system was no backyard lemonade stand operation. It was a sophisticated network of trade spanning astonishing distances. We're talking about textiles being traded across the Andes and into the Amazon, with some reaching as far as the northern coast of what is now Chile. That's a journey of over 1,000 miles, equivalent to trekking from New York to Miami, but without the convenience of a non-stop flight or even a decent highway rest stop. These textiles were more than just swathes of fabric, they were the equivalent of a modern-day Picasso. Imagine offering a bolt of intricately woven cloth as payment for a couple of llamas or a sack of quinoa. It sounds quaint until you realize that these textiles were so valuable they could be exchanged for essential goods, labor, and even land. It was like trading a Rembrandt for a Tesla, except the Rembrandt could also keep you warm and serve as a portable status symbol. Now, let's debunk the myth that this was all sunshine and rainbows. While the idea of a barter economy sounds charmingly rustic, it's also a logistical nightmare. The value of a textile depended on its quality, dye, and complexity, but it also fluctuated based on supply and demand, much like the stock market. A beautifully dyed piece of cloth could be worth a fortune one season and barely enough to barter for a bag of maize the next. It required a keen understanding of market trends, a skill not unlike a modern-day hedge fund manager. And let's not overlook the political and social factors at play here. In a society where textiles were akin to a social media following, the more impressive your collection, the higher your status. This created a hierarchy where textile artisans were both celebrated and exploited. They were the rock stars of their time, sure, but they also faced the pressures of meeting high expectations, much like any artist, under the scrutiny of a demanding patron. One misstep, and your reputation could unravel faster than a poorly tied knot. Now, imagine the distances these textiles travelled. They weren't just moving across town. They were crossing mountain ranges and jungles, braving the elements and the possibility of running into less than friendly neighbours. This wasn't just trade, it was an epic saga of adventure and risk, akin to the Silk Road's more tropical cousin. Each piece of fabric carried the story of its journey, a narrative woven into its very fibres. And the economics of it all? Absolutely mind-boggling. The textile industry was a well-oiled machine, employing countless artisans, traders, and middlemen. It required organization and management that would put modern supply chain logistics to shame. Imagine coordinating the production and distribution of thousands of textiles without the luxury of email or even a basic postal service. It was a testament to human ingenuity and cooperation, a reminder that necessity truly is the mother of invention. But the real kicker? Textiles weren't just about economics, they were about identity. Each piece was a canvas, telling stories of cultural significance and personal expression. The colours, patterns and techniques used were as distinctive as a fingerprint, allowing individuals to declare their heritage, status and even political allegiance. It was fashion as communication, long before Instagram hashtags and brand collaborations. So, next time you're scrolling through your favourite online retailer, consider the ancient Peruvians who turned textiles into an art form, an economy, and a way of life. They wove their world with threads of creativity, resilience, and ambition, leaving behind a legacy as rich and intricate as the fabrics they crafted. And trust me, that's something even the most luxurious designer label can't replicate. Speaking of legacies, let's switch gears and meet the real heavy hitters behind ancient Peru's textile boom. The power players who wielded threads like today's politicians wield Twitter, albeit with more style and less scandal. In the world of the Inca emperors and Moche priest kings, textiles weren't just for flaunting wealth or keeping warm. They were the ultimate expression of power, influence, and sometimes even divine mandate. First, we need to talk about the Inca emperors, the big kahunas of the Andes. Imagine a society where your clothes could literally make you a god. Inca emperors were considered living deities, and their garments reflected that celestial status. We're talking tunics, woven from vicuña wool, the finest fibre known to man, so exclusive that only the emperor could wear it. Vicuña wool was like the Rolls-Royce of textiles, soft, luxurious, and so rare that it made alpaca wool look like polyester. Keeping it exclusive, the Incas would only shear vicuñas every 3 years, under strict state control, making these garments as much a symbol of state power as the emperor's golden throne. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Textiles weren't just about fabric, they were about politics. The Incas used textiles to unite their vast empire, which stretched over 2,500 miles along the spine of the Andes. That's roughly the distance from New York to Los Angeles, in case you're wondering. Each conquered region contributed its own textile style to the empire's collection, creating a tapestry of cultural motifs that were as much about diplomacy as decoration. This wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a political move that stitched the empire together, literally and figuratively. The emperor's wardrobe was a walking billboard of his domain, a visual map of the territories under his thumb. But let's not pretend this was all benevolent cultural exchange. The Incas were shrewd operators, and textiles were their tool for control. They implemented a labor tax called the mita, which required subjects to contribute labor to state projects, including textile production. This wasn't your average arts and crafts afternoon, it was a state-run operation that fed the imperial machine. The Incas knew that control over textiles meant control over people. By regulating who could weave what and who could wear what, they maintained a tight grip on social order. It's like if the government had a say in your wardrobe choices today, except instead of banning flip-flops, they dictated your entire closet. While the Incas were busy weaving their empire, the Moche priest kings were operating their own textile-based power trip a few centuries earlier. These guys were the OG influencers, using textiles to communicate with the divine and assert their authority. The Moche civilization, which thrived from about 100 to 700 CE on Peru's northern coast, was a highly stratified society where the priest kings were the undisputed top dogs. Their garments were as much about spiritual power as political clout, adorned with symbols and motifs that told stories of gods and heroes. Imagine wearing a robe that not only looked fabulous, but also narrated your divine right to rule. Now that's what I call a power suit. The Moche had a knack for weaving spirituality into their textiles, literally. Their intricate designs often depicted scenes of mythology and ritual, serving as a visual language that connected the earthly with the ethereal. This wasn't just about looking good for the gods, it was about embodying them. The textiles used in religious ceremonies were believed to be imbued with spiritual power, a tangible link between the human and the divine. So when a Moche priest king donned his ceremonial garb, he wasn't just dressing to impress, he was stepping into the role of a god, with all the responsibilities and perks that entailed. But let's not get too caught up in the divine glamour. While the Moche priest kings were busy channeling their inner deities through their wardrobe, the average Joe, or Jose in this case, was toiling away to make it all possible. Textile production was a labor-intensive process, often carried out by skilled artisans working under the watchful eyes of the elite. These artisans were the unsung heroes of the Moshe world, weaving the fabrics that made the priest-king's power plays possible. It was a system that relied on the expertise and labor of many to elevate the few, a tale as old as time, it seems. And let's not forget the economic implications. Textiles were a significant part of the Moshe economy, serving not only as clothing but also as a form of wealth storage. While gold and silver artifacts might steal the spotlight in museums today, textiles were the true currency of the Moshe world. They were traded, gifted, and even used as tribute, a tangible representation of value that could be passed from hand to hand or loom to loom, as it were. It was a system of wealth and power that was as intricate as the textiles themselves, woven with threads of tradition, belief, and authority. So, as we unravel the history of ancient Peru's textile industry, let's remember that these fabrics were more than just pretty patterns. They were the threads that held a society together, the canvas on which power was painted, and the currency that kept the wheels of an empire turning. From the divine robes of the Incas to the sacred garments of the Moshe, textiles were the ultimate expression of influence and control. And while the clothes might not make the man, in ancient Peru, they certainly made the ruler. As we continue our journey through the warp and weft of history, remember that each stitch tells a story and each pattern holds a secret. The power players of ancient Peru knew this all too well, using textiles to weave a narrative of power, politics, and prestige that still resonates today. And trust me, this is just the beginning. There's plenty more to unravel as we delve deeper into the world of ancient Peruvian textiles, so stay tuned because the tapestry is far from finished. As we weave our way through the tapestry of ancient Peru's textile industry, it's time to unravel a few threads of myth specifically. The romanticized notion of the noble savage, who supposedly spent his days crafting exquisite textiles in some utopian paradise. Sorry to burst your bubble, but the reality was more like a high-stakes episode of Project Runway, minus the glam but with all the pressure. Let's start with the labor involved. Picture this, a backstrap loom, a tool that sounds almost quaint, right? Except when you realize it means strapping one end to your body and the other to a stationary object, turning yourself into a human weaving machine. This wasn't a casual hobby for relaxing afternoons, it was back-breaking work that required serious skill and endurance. Weavers spent long hours hunched over these looms, their fingers dancing with a precision that could rival a concert pianist's. And unlike a pianist, they didn't have a cushy chair to sit in, not exactly the idyllic image of crafting in a sun-dappled courtyard. Now, let's talk about who was doing all this weaving. In many ancient Peruvian societies, textile production was a gendered affair. Women were primarily responsible for the weaving, and their expertise was passed down through generations like a family heirloom. But don't mistake this for some kind of quaint domestic pastime. Women were the backbone of the textile economy, their labor both essential and undervalued. This wasn't just about making pretty patterns, it was about producing the goods that kept the economy spinning like a top. Of course, gender dynamics weren't the only threads in this fabric, social hierarchies played a major role too. In these societies, your position in the social pecking order could dictate everything from the quality of the materials you worked with to the complexity of the patterns you were allowed to weave. The finest vicuña wool was reserved for the elite, while the rest of the populace made do with more pedestrian fibers. And let's not forget the artisans who created the most intricate designs. They might have been celebrated for their skills, but they were still subject to the whims of their elite patrons, whose appreciation could be as fickle as a cat's affection. The stakes in this game were high. A misstep in weaving could lead to a pattern that didn't align, a colour that bled, or worse, a garment that didn't impress the powers that be. In a world where textiles were as much about politics as they were about fashion, a poor performance could have serious consequences. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a start-up failing to deliver on its promises. The pressure was real, and the stakes were no joke. And while we're talking pressure, let's not overlook the sheer physicality of it all. The work was grueling, often taking place in cramped, dimly lit quarters that were more sweatshop than studio. It was the kind of environment that would make the harshest working conditions today look like a wellness retreat. This was no romanticized artisan's life. It was hard labor, pure and simple. But why endure such toil? Because textiles were the lifeblood of ancient Peruvian society. They were the currency, the status symbols, the political tools. A well-crafted textile was a ticket to social mobility, or at least survival. The weavers knew their work was valuable, even if their society didn't always acknowledge it. So they toiled, day in and day out, their hands shaping the fabric of their world one thread at a time. As we unravel these myths, let's also acknowledge their allure. The idea of the noble savage, the romanticized artisan, persists because it's comforting to imagine a world where creativity and craft were valued above all else. But the truth is far more complex and, in some ways, more compelling. The story of ancient Peru's textile industry is one of innovation, endurance, and the relentless pursuit of excellence, driven by necessity as much as by artistry. The reality was gritty, and at times brutal. But it was also a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. These weavers weren't just creators, they were survivors, navigating a world that demanded the best of them at every turn. And in their hands, threads became tapestries, fabric became history. As we delve deeper into this world, we'll continue to unravel the complexities of ancient Peru's textile industry. There's more to explore, more myths to debunk, and more stories to tell. So stick around, because this is just the beginning of a journey through history that's as intricate and rich as the textiles themselves. And so, as we continue to unspool the tale of ancient Peruvian textiles, let's leap forward from the age of emperors and priest-kings to today, where their legacy thrives in the most unexpected of places, modern fashion. That's right, those ancient threads have woven their way into the catwalks of Paris and Milan like a time-travelling style guide that refuses to go out of vogue. It's like the ultimate vintage comeback, except this isn't about raiding Grandma's closet. This is more about channeling 5,000 years of textile mastery into today's haute couture. Start by considering the humble poncho. Before it became a festival staple for Coachella goers, the poncho was a masterpiece of Andean weaving, a piece as versatile as a little black dress, but way more functional. And here's a fun fact. While you might toss one on to brave a music festival drizzle, the original poncho was designed to withstand the fierce Andean elements while also broadcasting social status through elaborate designs. Today, it's a symbol of how ancient styles have been reimagined, proving that sometimes the best fashion advice is to look back before you step forward. But it's not just about what's on the runway. Ancient Peruvian techniques have infiltrated modern textile production, making their mark on contemporary design. Take the color palette. Those vibrant hues you see? They owe a debt to the natural dyes perfected by ancient Peruvian artisans. Indigo for blues, cochineal for reds, all extracted from the environment with a skill that not only created breathtaking colors, but did so sustainably. In a world increasingly conscious of its ecological footprint, these age-old methods are suddenly the height of eco-chic. Who would have thought that the future of fashion would be rooted in the past? And then there's the material itself. Alpaca wool, once the choice of Andean aristocracy, has become the darling of luxury fabric. It's softer than cashmere, warmer than wool, and hypoallergenic to boot. This wasn't lost on the ancient Peruvians, who knew a thing or two about staying warm in the high-altitude chill. Fast forward to today, and designers are flocking to alpaca farms like they're on a pilgrimage to the holy grail of fibers. It's a classic case of everything old is new again, as the fashion industry rediscovers the merits of a fiber that's been around longer than most countries. Now let's talk about technique. The ancient Peruvians didn't just invent complex weaving methods, they perfected them. The backstrap loom, a deceptively simple piece of equipment, has inspired modern designers to think outside the box, literally. It's the kind of innovation that makes you wonder why we ever complicated things with machines, when a strap and a stick could do the job so beautifully. This back-to-basics approach has fueled a resurgence in handcrafted, artisanal textiles, with designers touting the virtues of slow fashion like it's the latest trend. Spoiler alert, it's been trending for thousands of years. But what about the artisans themselves? It's easy to get swept up in the glamour of high fashion and forget the hands that make it possible. The legacy of ancient Peruvian weavers is more than just the sum of their textiles. It's a testament to their skill, creativity, and resilience. Today, many of their descendants continue to practice these age-old techniques, often in the same villages where their ancestors once wove for kings and gods. Supporting these artisans isn't just about preserving history. It's about honouring a tradition that has withstood the test of time, political upheaval, and cultural shifts. And let's not gloss over the economic impact. The global market for alpaca wool alone is valued at hundreds of millions of dollars, a testament to the enduring appeal of these ancient practices. This isn't just about fashion, it's about livelihoods, communities, and a cultural heritage that's as rich as the textiles themselves. In a world where mass production often trumps craftsmanship, the story of ancient Peruvian textiles is a reminder that quality and tradition still hold sway over quantity and trendiness. So, are these ancient innovations truly influencing contemporary designers? Absolutely. From the runways of the world's fashion capitals to the local markets where these textiles are still lovingly crafted, the legacy of ancient Peru is alive and well. It's a legacy woven with threads of history, culture, and an unyielding commitment to excellence. A legacy that continues to inspire, challenge, and redefine what it means to be fashionable. As we wrap up this journey through the warp and weft of history, let's take a moment to appreciate the artisans who spun their way into the annals of history. These were the original creators, the ones who turned simple fibers into complex tapestries that spoke of gods, empires, and everyday life. Their legacy isn't just in the museums or on the catwalks, it's in every stitch, every pattern, every colour that has transcended time to influence the world today. And there you have it, a history lesson that's as much about the future as it is about the past. Ancient Peruvian textiles didn't just survive, they've thrived, evolving from the looms of the Andes to the forefront of modern fashion. It's a story of innovation, resilience, and timeless elegance, woven together with the kind of skill that never goes out of style. And, as we continue to admire and be inspired by these incredible textiles, let's remember to give credit where it's due to the artisans who made it all possible. After all, in the world of fashion, it's not just about the clothes you wear, but the stories they tell. In the bustling city of Rosario, Argentina, 1928, a baby named Ernesto Guevara de la Serna was born, destined to become a global icon, and he was already showing signs of rebellion. His family, slightly better off than most, was steeped in leftist ideology, debating politics like some families argue over who left the milk out. By the time Ernesto hit his teenage years, asthma was his constant companion, not exactly the best buddy for the adventurous life he craved. If you think asthma could slow him down, think again. This was a kid who played rugby with the kind of determination you'd expect from someone trying to outrun a charging bull. Fast forward to the University of Buenos Aires, where Ernesto tackled medical school. Now, don't get the idea this was a straight-laced future doctor. He was more of a cure the world type, with a side of, let's see where this road takes me. His medical studies were more like a series of pit stops in his quest to understand the world, rather than a career path. And then came the journey that would change everything. The infamous motorcycle trip. Ah, the motorcycle trip. Picture a dilapidated 1939 Norton 500cc dubbed La Poderosa II, the Mighty One. The irony not lost on anyone who saw it. It was more like the occasionally functional one. In 1952, Guevara and his buddy Alberto Granado embarked on a 4,000-mile journey across the continent. Their mission? To explore Latin America. Their actual achievements? A mix of breakdowns, mishaps, and the occasional epiphany. The trip was a comedy of errors. On one occasion, La Poderosa decided it was done cooperating just outside a small Chilean town. The locals, presumably amused by the sight of two scruffy Argentinians trying to coax life back into the beast, pitched in with some repairs. It was here that Ernesto's knack for charming the pants-off people came in handy who knew a future revolutionary could be so good at blagging free meals and repairs. Despite the mechanical disasters, or perhaps because of them, Ernesto's eyes were open to the harsh realities faced by the people he met along the way. Take the mining towns of Chile, for instance. Here, Guevara encountered workers living in abject poverty while the fruits of their labor lined the pockets of foreign corporations. The wealth gap was as wide as the Andes, and it hit Ernesto like a ton of bricks. This was the fuel that would eventually power his revolutionary engine. In Peru, the situation was no different. Guevara and Granado arrived at the San Pablo leper colony, where they spent several weeks volunteering. Now, if you're picturing Guevara as some saintly figure ministering to the sick, let's just say he was more of a mix between a doctor and a stand-up comedian. He'd crack jokes to lighten the mood, all the while empathizing deeply with the patients. Guevara swam across the Amazon River to prove a point about unity, an event that was part heroics, part reckless lunacy. But hey, it worked. By the time the adventure rolled to an end, Guevara's diary was filled with reflections that hinted at the revolutionary fire to come. He wrote about the silent suffering of the people he met, the crushing weight of poverty, and his growing realization that something had to change. The romantic image of the young adventurer was beginning to crack, revealing the radical thinker underneath. Returning to Buenos Aires, Guevara was no longer just Ernesto. He was Che, a nickname that stuck like glue, thanks to his habit of ending sentences with the Argentine slang "cha," which is a bit like saying mates or dude. The motorcycle trip had transformed him, and medical school now felt like a footnote in the story of his life. In the years that followed, Che would become deeply involved in political movements across Latin America. But let's not rush ahead. The journey may have ended, but the road to revolution was only just beginning. Che Guevara's early days were a mix of youthful misadventures and profound awakenings, a cocktail of idealism and gritty reality that would shape one of the 20th century's most iconic figures. And so, with his wanderlust now fully ignited, Che Guevara was a man on a mission, albeit one not quite defined, one that would lead him to Mexico City in 1955. Picture this: a bustling metropolis, a melting pot of expatriates and rebels, where plotting revolutions was as common as ordering a taco. Here, the stars aligned for Che when he met Fidel Castro, the charismatic Cuban lawyer with a penchant for fiery speeches and an eye on overthrowing Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista. Now, this wasn't a casual chat over churros. No, this was a meeting of minds that would change the course of history. Castro, fresh out of a prison stint for a failed coup attempt, was rallying a motley crew of exiles and dreamers for another shot at revolution. Che, ever the opportunist with a burgeoning revolutionary spirit, saw the Cuban cause as the perfect stage for his ideals. This was more than just a handshake agreement. It was the start of a formidable partnership forged in the fires of a shared vision. Fast forward a bit to the shores of Cuba in 1956, and you'll find Che aboard the Granma, a yacht that was supposed to be a symbol of hope, but ended up more like a floating disaster. Imagine squeezing 82 revolutionaries onto a vessel meant for 12. It's a wonder they didn't all jump ship from claustrophobia alone. After a botched landing, a series of missteps, and a run-in with Batista's forces that reduced their numbers to a mere dozen, the survivors retreated to the Sierra Maestra Mountains. This is where the legend of Che as a guerrilla leader truly takes root, although let's not romanticize it too much. The Sierra Maestra was no tropical paradise. It was a harsh, mosquito-infested jungle where survival was the name of the game. It was here that Che's tactical prowess and his fair share of blunders came into play. He wasn't just a man with a gun. He was a strategist, a doctor, and, occasionally, a reluctant disciplinarian. His asthma was an ever-present nuisance, often leaving him wheezing like a broken accordion. Yet, despite his medical condition, he was rarely seen without a cigar, because who can resist the allure of irony? Che's leadership style was a curious mix of inspiration and intimidation. He was known to be both compassionate and ruthless, a combination that could either rally or terrify his troops. He implemented a strict code of conduct, which included consequences for those caught pilfering supplies. Che's brand of justice was swift, often harsh, and undeniably effective in maintaining order among the ranks. This wasn't just about fighting Batista's forces. It was about instilling discipline and unity in a ragtag group that needed to function like a well-oiled machine, or at least a decently maintained bicycle. But let's not forget, Che was human. There were moments of tactical brilliance, like executing hit-and-run attacks that left Batista's troops reeling. Yet, for every stroke of genius, there were blunders that could have spelled disaster. At times, the rebels found themselves low on food, ammo, and morale, relying on the goodwill of local peasants to fill their stomachs and their ranks. Guevara was adept at winning over the Cuban campesinos, not just through ideology, but with genuine empathy for their plight. His medical skills didn't hurt either. Patching up wounds and curing ailments built trust and turned villagers into allies. What's fascinating is how Che managed to balance the grim reality of guerrilla warfare with the quirks of life as a revolutionary. Despite the hardships, there was a camaraderie among the rebels that could only be forged in the crucible of shared struggle. They swapped stories over the campfire, debated politics, and, of course, indulged in the occasional cigar. Che's love for cigars was legendary, a luxury he allowed himself even when rations were tight. It was a small comfort, a reminder of the normalcy that lay beyond the jungle. As the months turned into years, the rebel forces grew in number and confidence, slowly but surely chipping away at Batista's regime. Che's role in this was undeniable. He was a key figure in planning and executing the operations that would eventually lead to the fall of Havana. Yet this wasn't just about military conquest. For Che, the Cuban Revolution was a living, breathing experiment in his vision of a just society. He wasn't just fighting for political change, he was fighting for an economic and social revolution that would upend the status quo. It's easy to get caught up in the romance of the revolution, the dashing guerrilla leader, the noble cause, the triumph against the odds. But let's not kid ourselves. The reality was far messier. The Sierra Maestra campaign was a brutal grind, a test of endurance that exposed the thin line between heroism and folly. Che's asthma attacks were a constant reminder of his human frailty, yet they also highlighted his resilience. He refused to let his condition define him, even when it meant pushing himself to the brink. And so, the myth of Che Guevara began to take shape, a blend of fact and fiction that still captivates imaginations today. His involvement in the Cuban Revolution was a pivotal chapter in his life, transforming him from a wandering idealist into a leader of men. The seeds of his later endeavors, his forays into government, his attempts to export revolution, were sown in the mountains of Cuba. Yet, as we'll explore in the next installment, the path from revolutionary hero to global icon was fraught with challenges and contradictions that would test even Che's formidable resolve. For now, let's leave Che in the Sierra Maestra, a man on the cusp of history with a cigar in hand and a fire in his soul. As the Cuban Revolution's dust began to settle, Che Guevara found himself in a new kind of battlefield, the bureaucratic maze of post-revolutionary governance. Gone were the days of dodging bullets and strategizing guerrilla attacks in the Sierra Maestra. Now, it was all about navigating the equally treacherous corridors of government buildings. As fate would have it, Che became the Minister of Industries, a role that would test his revolutionary zeal in ways the jungle never did. Picture this. Che, a man who'd spent years in olive fatigues, suddenly thrust into the world of economic policies and industrial strategies. His appointment wasn't just a career change, it was a seismic shift from the adrenaline-fueled rebellion to the slow grind of nation-building. But Che wasn't interested in playing it safe or blending in. No, he insisted on shaking things up, tossing out the playbook, and writing his own rules, often with mixed results. Enter Guevarism, Che's own brand of economic theory that was as controversial as it was ambitious. At its heart was the idea of moral incentives over material ones. Che believed workers should be motivated by the greater good rather than the lure of personal gain. In his view, the revolution wasn't just about political change, it was about creating a new kind of human being, one who labored for the collective rather than individual profit. Idealistic? Absolutely. Practical? Well, that's where things get a bit murky. Che's disdain for traditional economic models was palpable. He famously declared war on ties, those sartorial symbols of capitalist conformity. He thought they choked not just the neck, but the revolutionary spirit itself. It's said he even had a drawer full of decapitated ties, trophies of his sartorial rebellion. And while that might sound like a quirky anecdote, it was emblematic of his broader struggle with the rigidity of bureaucratic systems. Now, let's talk numbers. Under Che's leadership, Cuba's industrial output didn't exactly soar. In fact, it often stumbled. Che's push for rapid industrialization without the necessary infrastructure led to inefficiencies and frequent shortages. The sugar industry, Cuba's economic backbone, was especially hard hit. Che's attempts to diversify the economy away from sugar plantations were noble but often misguided, leading to a dip in production levels. By 1963, The sugar harvest was down to just 3.8 million tons, a significant drop from pre-revolution levels. Che's economic policies were akin to a high-stakes game of Jenga, where one wrong move threatened to topple the entire structure. He implemented the Newman theory, aiming to replace the capitalist mindset with socialist consciousness. The idea was to phase out money gradually, replacing it with a system based on moral incentives. But the transition wasn't seamless. Workers, accustomed to tangible rewards, were less than enthusiastic about the abstract promise of a better tomorrow. And who could blame them? It's hard to pay the bills with moral satisfaction. Che's battles with bureaucracy were legendary. He once remarked that dealing with the bureaucratic machinery was like being stuck in a Kafkaesque nightmare where logic was an alien concept. His frustration was palpable, and it wasn't helped by the fact that he was trying to overhaul an entire economic system while learning on the fly. Che was a revolutionary, not an economist, and his lack of experience showed. Yet, despite the setbacks, he remained undeterred, driven by an unwavering belief in his vision. But let's dig deeper into the myth versus reality. Che's image as a fearless leader and visionary thinker is compelling, no doubt. Yet the practicalities of transforming Cuba's economy were far less romantic. The inefficiencies and resource shortages were real, affecting the daily lives of millions. For every grand speech about the future, there was a factory operating below capacity, a crop yield failing to meet expectations. Che's ideals were noble, but his execution often fell short. Yet, even in failure, there was a certain charm to Che's relentless optimism. His speeches were peppered with humor, his sarcasm a weapon against the crushing weight of bureaucratic inertia. In one instance, he quipped about the absurdity of paperwork, suggesting that the stacks of unsigned documents could build a bridge to the moon. It was classic Che turning frustration into a punchline, even as the system creaked under its own weight. But let's not paint Che as a mere dreamer lost in the clouds of ideology. He was a man of action, determined to see his vision through, even if it meant making unpopular decisions. He implemented strict controls on imports and exports, hoping to foster self-sufficiency. He pushed for nationalization of key industries, believing that state control was essential for true independence. Yet, these measures often led to bottlenecks and inefficiencies, highlighting the gap between revolutionary ideals and economic realities. Che's tenure as Minister of Industries was a wild ride, full of ambition, missteps, and the occasional breakthrough. While his economic policies didn't always hit the mark, they were part of a broader experiment in shaping a new Cuba. For Che, it wasn't just about numbers and outputs. It was about crafting a society that reflected the revolutionary spirit. It was about creating a nation that defied the capitalist norms he so despised. Despite the hurdles, Che's charisma and conviction never wavered. He remained a symbol of revolutionary fervor, even as he grappled with the mundane realities of governance. His story is a poignant reminder that the path from idealism to pragmatism is rarely straightforward. It's a journey fraught with contradictions, where the line between visionary and quixotic is often blurred. In the end, Che's post-revolutionary adventures were a testament to his unyielding spirit. He was a man who dared to dream big, who took on the system with nothing but his ideals and a healthy dose of humor. And while his economic strategies may not have been an unqualified success, they were undeniably bold and unapologetically idealistic, a reflection of the complex, contradictory figure that was Che Guevara. As we prepare to explore the next phase of Che's tumultuous journey, one thing is clear: his story is far from over. The revolutionary spirit that defined his life would soon take him beyond the shores of Cuba into new territories and fresh challenges. But that, dear listeners, is a tale for another day. For now, let's leave Che in the heart of Havana, a man with a mission, a minister with a vision, and a revolutionary who refused to be tied down, literally or figuratively. As the sun set on Che Guevara's bureaucratic escapades in Havana, his eyes turned to a new horizon. The Cuban Revolution was a victory, sure, but resting on laurels? Not exactly Che's style. For him, the fight for socialism was like a never-ending game of whack-a-mole, knock one dictator down and another pops up elsewhere. So, with his ever-present cigar and a briefcase full of idealism, Che set his sights on Africa, specifically the Congo, a land grappling with its own post-colonial hangover. Now, if you're imagining Che as some kind of revolutionary Indiana Jones, Well, brace yourself for a reality check. The Congo adventure wasn't a swashbuckling escapade, but more of a logistical nightmare, the kind that could make even the most seasoned traveller reach for the aspirin. It was 1965, and Che was determined to export the Cuban model of revolution to the African continent. But let's just say the terrain wasn't as welcoming as a Cuban cigar shop on payday. Che arrived in the Congo with a handful of Cuban soldiers and a boatload of optimism. His mission? To support the Simba rebellion against the pro-Western government. On paper, it sounded like a match made in socialist heaven. In practice, it was more like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. The Congolese fighters were untrained, ill-equipped, and, let's be honest, not entirely on board with Che's brand of Marxism. They were more concerned with local power struggles than global ideological battles. Logistical challenges were the order of the day. Picture this: dense jungles, unpredictable weather, and supply lines that were about as reliable as a politician's promise. The Cuban contingent faced chronic food shortages, and when they did manage to get their hands on supplies, they often went missing faster than a politician's ethics. Che, ever the improviser, tried to rally the troops with his fiery speeches, but his Spanish had about as much effect as a whisper in a windstorm. And then there were the cultural misunderstandings. Che's revolutionary fervour clashed with the local customs like oil and water. He expected discipline and commitment akin to his Cuban comrades, but the Congolese fighters had their own way of doing things, like disappearing at the first sign of combat or prioritizing tribal loyalty over the collective cause. It was a classic case of lost in translation, with Che trying to lead a revolution in a language few around him spoke fluently. Adding to the comedy of errors was Che's infamous penchant for disguises. In an attempt to blend in, he'd don local garb, which was about as effective as a tuxedo at a beach party. His attempts at going incognito often ended in laughter. His own troops reportedly struggled to keep a straight face. Despite these missteps, Che soldiered on, determined to make his mark on African soil. Yet, for all his efforts, the Congo campaign was an uphill battle. By late 1965, it became clear that the dream of a socialist Congo was slipping through Che's fingers like sand. The rebels were losing ground, the Cuban support was dwindling, and the hoped-for Pan-African uprising was more mirage than reality. The mission was quietly wound down, leaving Che with a sobering realization: not every revolution could be exported like a box of cigars. But if you thought this would deter him, think again. Che's revolutionary spirit was like a fire that refused to be doused. His next stop? Bolivia. A landlocked country with a rich history of indigenous struggle and a political landscape as volatile as a shaken soda can. Che saw Bolivia as the perfect springboard for launching a Latin American revolution, a domino effect of uprisings that would topple oppressive regimes like a house of cards. In November 1966, under the pseudonym Ramon, Che slipped into Bolivia with a small contingent of Cuban and local fighters. His goal? To ignite a guerrilla war that would spread across the continent. But once again, reality had other plans. The Bolivian terrain was unforgiving, the mountains and jungles posing challenges that would test even the most seasoned guerrilla. Che's asthma, that old nemesis, was like an uninvited guest at a party, always showing up at the worst possible moments. The logistical challenges were as formidable as ever. Supplies were scarce, and the locals were less than enthusiastic about harbouring a band of armed rebels. Unlike in Cuba, where Che had won over the peasants with his charisma and medical skills, in Bolivia he was met with suspicion and indifference. The promised support from the local Communist Party fizzled out faster than a cheap Roman candle, leaving Che and his band of rebels isolated and vulnerable. By the summer of 1967, the situation had grown desperate. The Bolivian army, with the backing of the CIA, was closing in, and Che's guerrilla forces were dwindling. The dream of a continental revolution was slipping away, leaving behind a harsh reality that was impossible to ignore. Che was outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time. October 8, 1967, marked the end of the line for Che in Bolivia. Captured in a jungle schoolhouse by Bolivian forces, his fate was sealed. The following day, he was executed, his last moments captured in a haunting photograph that would soon become iconic. Che's death at age 39 marked the end of an era, but not the end of his legend. If anything, it cemented his status as a martyr, his image immortalized on posters and T-shirts around the world, a symbol of rebellion, defiance, and unyielding idealism. So, what's the takeaway from Che's international escapades? It's a tale of ambition and failure, of dreams that soared high only to crash land in the harsh terrain of reality. Che Guevara's adventures in Africa and Bolivia highlight the complexities of revolution, the cultural clashes, logistical nightmares, and the sobering truth that ideology alone cannot win hearts and minds. Yet, despite the setbacks, Che's legacy endures, a testament to the power of belief and the allure of the revolutionary spirit. As we prepare to delve into the final chapter of Che's story, one thing is clear. His life was a whirlwind of contradictions and convictions, a journey marked by both triumphs and tragedies. The myth of Che Guevara is one of enduring fascination, a blend of fact and fiction that continues to captivate and inspire. But there's more to explore, more layers to peel back, as we unravel the enigma of a man who dared to dream beyond borders. Stay tuned, because Che's story is far from over. The myth of Che Guevara is a peculiar beast, a blend of iconography and ideology that transcends the man himself. After his death, Che was catapulted from a mortal with dreams and flaws into a symbol of defiance and revolution, immortalized in an image that's as ubiquitous as a pop song. His face, with that brooding stare beneath the black beret, plastered across posters, T-shirts, and dorm rooms worldwide. But how did this transformation occur, and what does it say about the allure of rebellion? To understand Che's enduring legacy, we must first dissect the myth from the man. Che's life was a cocktail of contradictions. He was a doctor who took up arms, a romantic who could be ruthlessly pragmatic, and a Marxist who didn't always toe the party line. His willingness to die for his ideals, while undeniably brave, also painted him as a martyr, a role that history tends to romanticize with a heavy brush. He became a canvas onto which people projected their own aspirations and discontents. Yet, let's not forget the gritty realism behind the mythology. Che's revolutionary methods were often as unforgiving as the systems he sought to dismantle. His approach to discipline within the guerrilla ranks was strict, sometimes brutal. A necessary evil, he believed, to forge a unified front against oppressive regimes. But those who lionize him today often gloss over these harsher truths, preferring the sanitized version of a fearless freedom fighter. The economic backdrop of Che's rise to iconic status is a tale in itself. The 1960s and 70s were rife with social upheaval and disillusionment with the status quo. The Vietnam War, civil rights movements, and a growing divide between the haves and have-nots created fertile ground for the seeds of rebellion. Enter Che, a charismatic figure who seemed to embody the resistance against imperialism and capitalist excess. It's no wonder his image became shorthand for youthful defiance, even if the realities of his life were far more complex. Che's transformation into a cultural icon was, in part, the work of savvy marketing and timing. The famous photo by Alberto Corda, snapped in 1960 during a memorial service in Havana, captured Che's intensity and became the face of the revolution. This image, later stylized by the Irish artist Jim Fitzpatrick, spread like wildfire, detached from its original context and imbued with universal appeal. It's a testament to the power of imagery in shaping public perception, a single frame that distilled Che's essence into a potent symbol of rebellion. Yet, the man behind the myth was no saint. Che's economic policies in Cuba were ambitious, but fraught with challenges. His time as the Minister of Industries saw the Cuban economy struggle, with shortages and inefficiencies a constant headache. His attempts to diversify away from sugar and promote industrialization were noble in intent, but often fumbled in execution. The reality was that Che was an idealist navigating a world that demanded pragmatism, a clash that would haunt his legacy. Despite these challenges, Che's vision extended beyond mere economics. He sought to cultivate a new societal consciousness, one where personal sacrifice trumped material gain. It's a vision that remains compelling, yet simultaneously impractical when faced with the complexities of human nature. Che believed in the new man, a concept that required people to abandon self-interest for collective good, a lofty goal that often buckled under the weight of real-world demands. As the years passed, Che's image evolved, becoming a staple of counterculture and protest movements. His face, once a rallying cry for socialist ideals, morphed into a symbol of anti-establishment sentiment in all its forms. From student protests in Paris to anti-war demonstrations in the United States, Che's visage was there, an emblem of resistance against the powers that be. Ironically, this commodification of his image, often by the very capitalist systems he opposed, adds another layer to the mythos, a paradox that Che himself might have found both amusing and infuriating. The romanticism surrounding Che Guevara is undeniable, yet it's crucial to balance it with the less glamorous facets of his life. His attempts to export revolution were fraught with missteps and misunderstandings, highlighting the challenges of applying a one-size-fits-all approach to diverse political landscapes. His failures in the Congo and Bolivia serve as stark reminders that ideology alone cannot overcome cultural and logistical hurdles. It's a humbling narrative that underscores the limits of revolutionary zeal in the face of complex realities. Despite the mythologizing, Che's legacy endures because it speaks to the universal human desire for justice and equality. His story is a testament to the power of conviction, even when it clashes with practicality. In many ways, Che Guevara embodies the eternal struggle between idealism and reality. A dance as old as time, with steps that are as inspiring as they are cautionary. As we wrap up this exploration of Che's life and legacy, one thing becomes clear. The allure of rebellion is as much about the dream as the deed. Che Guevara remains a figure of fascination, not because he was perfect, but because he dared to dream beyond the confines of the possible. His life is a reminder that while the path to change is fraught with challenges, the pursuit itself is a worthy endeavor. Whether viewed as a hero or a flawed revolutionary, Che's story continues to resonate, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to challenge the status quo and strive for a better world. Amid the swirling mist and muddle of 14th century central Mexico, a ragtag group of wanderers stumbled upon a marshy, mosquito-infested island in the middle of Lake Texcoco. Now, to the average onlooker, this might seem like a questionable choice for setting up shop. But these folks were the Aztecs, and they didn't come to play. They took one look at the swampy chaos and thought, yeah, we can work with this. And work with it they did. From this hodgepodge of water and mud emerged Tenochtitlan in 1325, a city that would grow into one of the most impressive urban centers of the pre-Columbian Americas, boasting a population of over 200,000 people at its peak. Before diving into the nitty-gritty of Aztec architecture, let's set the scene. The Aztecs didn't just build a city, they engineered a marvel. The construction of Tenochtitlan was like an ancient version of SimCity, but with actual stakes, like drowning if you got it wrong. They had to contend with Lake Texcoco's tendency to flood, and its swampy foundations that were about as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. Yet, they transformed it into a thriving metropolis with a complex network of canals, akin to Venice, but with fewer romantic gondola rides and more practical canoe commutes. The Aztecs' genius lay in their chinampas, or floating gardens, an ingenious agricultural method that would make any modern urban planner green with envy. These were essentially man-made islands created by piling up mud and vegetation. They were fertile enough to produce up to 7 crops a year. Imagine that. Productivity that would put even the most relentless tech startup to shame. These chinampas were not only a testament to the Aztecs' agricultural prowess, but also a clever solution to the challenges posed by their watery environment. Now, if you think that's impressive, wait until you hear about their engineering feats. The Aztecs weren't just throwing mud at the wall to see what stuck. Their infrastructure was meticulously planned and executed. They constructed an elaborate system of canals and causeways that connected the city to the mainland, effectively creating an ancient freeway system. It made getting through rush hour in the dense urban sprawl a bit more bearable. But why did the Aztecs build their capital in such an inhospitable location, you might ask? Legend has it that their gods instructed them to settle where they saw an eagle perched on a cactus with a snake in its beak. It sounds like a scene from a hardcore nature documentary, but it was this divine vision that led them to the swampy island. While the myth is captivating, the reality was probably more strategic. The island offered natural fortifications against enemies and control over the region's trade routes, making it a prime real estate opportunity despite the soggy foundations. In terms of aesthetics, Aztec architecture was as much about form as it was about function. Their buildings were not only practical but also designed to impress. Take the Templo Mayor, for instance. This colossal pyramid was the heart of Tenochtitlan, a testament to the Aztecs' religious devotion and a showcase of their architectural prowess. Standing at around 60 meters, it was regularly expanded and embellished, a bit like the Aztec equivalent of renovating your house every few years to keep up with the Joneses, or in this case, the neighboring city-states. Aztec architects employed a variety of materials, including volcanic stone and lime plaster, to create structures that were as durable as they were imposing. They had to innovate constantly, developing techniques to prevent their buildings from sinking into the soft lake bed. This was no small feat, considering the Aztecs didn't have access to the wheel or beasts of burden for heavy lifting. Everything was done with sheer human muscle and ingenuity. Yet, despite the grandeur of Aztec architecture, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Building an empire on a lake came with its fair share of challenges. Floods were as frequent as they were devastating, and maintaining the infrastructure required constant vigilance and labor. The Aztecs were also a society that thrived on conquest, and their architecture reflected this martial culture. The city was designed for defense, with walls and fortifications that could withstand attacks from rival factions. So, what can we learn from the Aztecs' architectural ambitions? Well, for starters, they remind us that great cities are not just built on solid ground, but on audacious dreams and clever solutions to environmental challenges. Today's urban planners could take a leaf from the Aztecs' book, particularly when it comes to sustainable agriculture and resource management. Their chinampas alone could inspire modern solutions for urban food production, especially as cities continue to sprawl over arable land. As we continue our journey through the architectural marvels of the Aztecs, keep in mind the sheer audacity of their vision. These were a people who didn't shy away from a challenge. They looked at a swamp and saw a future metropolis. In a world where cities often feel sprawling and unmanageable, the Aztecs remind us that intelligent planning and a willingness to adapt can transform even the most inhospitable environments into thriving centers of culture and innovation. And if you're ever feeling stuck between a rock and a hard place, just remember, the Aztecs built a city on a lake and made it work. Now that's what I call making lemonade out of lemons, or in this case, a booming city out of a bog. But let's shift our focus from the bog to the brickwork as we delve into the grandeur of the Aztec temples, especially the Templo Mayor. This wasn't just any temple. It was the spiritual core of Tenochtitlan, a monumental structure that stood as a testament to the Aztecs' architectural prowess and their religious fervor. Picture this, a towering pyramid, about 60 meters high, constantly expanding like it was in some kind of cosmic real estate boom. If the Aztecs had been around today, they'd probably have their own HGTV show called Extreme Temple Makeover. The Templo Mayor was rebuilt 6 times. Yes, you heard that right, 6 times. Each renovation was driven by a mix of religious devotion and a touch of keeping up with the city-states. The Aztecs had this insatiable urge to outdo themselves, a bit like a homeowner who just can't stop adding extensions. But there was more to this than just vanity. The temple was a symbol of political power and religious dominance, a message to both their deities and their neighbors that the Aztecs were not to be trifled with. And let's talk about the materials used. The Aztecs didn't just slap this thing together with whatever was lying around. They used volcanic stone, lime plaster, and precious materials like turquoise and obsidian, making it not just a place of worship, but a dazzling work of art. The cost of such materials was substantial, indicating the temple's significant economic impact. To put it into perspective, constructing these monumental edifices was the Aztec version of burning money to impress the gods, and perhaps their rivals. Now, the Templo Mayor wasn't just a static structure standing idly by. It was astronomically aligned with the sun, serving as a giant celestial calendar. During certain equinoxes, the sun would rise directly between its twin temples, a bit like the Aztec version of Stonehenge, but with more human sacrifices and fewer druids. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a carefully orchestrated spectacle, a cosmic show that demonstrated their knowledge of the stars and their belief in the divine order. Talk about a culture that took its sky-watching seriously. Speaking of spectacle, the Aztecs had a flair for the dramatic, and nothing says public event quite like human sacrifices. These weren't just grim rituals, but were grand public spectacles, designed to awe the masses and reinforce the power of the priestly and noble classes. The Aztec rulers understood the power of theatre, and they wielded it like a weapon. The sacrifices were believed to nourish the gods, ensuring the continuation of the world. It was a transaction of sorts, life for life, blood for prosperity. Morbid? Absolutely. But it was a pivotal part of their cosmology and social order. But let's not romanticize this too much. The myth of the mystical Aztecs with their supposed supernatural powers is just that, a myth. These sacrifices were as much about politics as they were about religion. They served as a stark reminder of the ruling class's power over life and death, a reminder that kept the populace in check and the empire running smoothly. It was less about appeasing gods and more about maintaining control. Now, you might be wondering about these supposed mystical powers. The truth is, the Aztecs were strategic masterminds. They harnessed the power of myth and spectacle to weave political narratives that bolstered their authority. They weren't casting spells or summoning rain. They were leveraging the power of belief. By portraying themselves as chosen by the gods, they created a narrative that justified their rule and expanded their influence. In this light, their mystical image was less about magic and more about masterful PR. The Templo Mayor stood at the heart of this narrative, a physical embodiment of their complex cosmology and political acumen. It wasn't just a place of worship, it was a stage upon which the drama of Aztec society played out. Each ceremony, each sacrifice was a performance with a purpose, a carefully choreographed event that reinforced the social hierarchy and kept the wheels of the empire turning. As we wrap up this leg of our journey through the architectural marvels of the Aztecs, it's clear that their achievements were as much about audacity as they were about artistry. The Templo Mayor was not just a pile of stones, it was a symbol of their civilization's brilliance and brutality. It stood as a testament to their ability to balance faith and power, myth and reality. The Aztecs remind us that architecture is not just about buildings, it's about the stories we tell through them and the power those stories hold. And so, with the sun setting behind the towering Templo Mayor, casting long shadows over the bustling streets of Tenochtitlan, we leave the Aztecs to their celestial calculations and their cosmic dances. As the city hums with life below, we'll pause here, ready to explore more of their world in the coming parts. For now, let's marvel at their ingenuity and reflect on the fine line between myth and reality, a line the Aztecs tread with all the grace of a tightrope walker above a lake of history. As the sun dips behind the Templo Mayor, casting its shadow over Tenochtitlan, our attention shifts from the heights of Aztec architecture to the lively arteries pumping life into the city, the bustling marketplaces and residential quarters. Picture this. The ancient city wasn't just an architectural marvel, but a living, breathing economic powerhouse. Imagine a market that would make even the most seasoned Wall Street trader break into a sweat. The central market of Tlatelolco was said to have attracted 60,000 people on peak days. That's like a Tenochtitlan version of Black Friday, but every day. At the heart of this economic engine was a dazzling array of goods that made the marketplace a kaleidoscope of colours, sounds, and scents. From gold and silver to cacao beans and exotic feathers, the market was a one-stop shop for everything you could possibly need, or didn't know you needed. Forget Amazon Prime, the Aztecs had their own Prime delivery system. The sheer variety of products on offer was a testament to the vast trade networks the Aztecs had established, stretching from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean. Now, let's talk logistics. How did they pull off such an organized chaos? The Aztecs were like ancient urban planners on steroids, with a city layout that would put many modern metropolises to shame. Tenochtitlan was divided into 4 main quadrants, each with its own districts and neighborhoods, a bit like a grid system but with more flair. Canals crisscrossed the city, serving as both transportation routes and irrigation systems. Imagine Venice, but with more jaguars and less gelato. These waterways were the lifeblood of the city, bustling with canoes laden with goods and people. It was a traffic system that functioned without a single traffic light or roundabout. And let's not forget the causeways that connected the city to the mainland, acting as the expressways of the day. These causeways were equipped with drawbridges, providing a means of defense that was more about practical engineering than medieval fantasy. The Aztecs' economy wasn't just about trade, it was also about tribute. Conquered city-states contributed to Tenochtitlan's wealth by paying tributes in goods like textiles, foodstuffs, and precious metals. This system of tribute was less about generosity and more about power dynamics, a constant reminder of the Aztecs' dominance. Essentially, it was the pay up or else policy. The tribute lists were meticulously kept, ensuring that no city-state conveniently forgot their dues. It was an economic strategy that fueled the empire's expansion and reinforced its political clout. Let's not sugarcoat it. This was a society built on the subjugation of others. The wealth of Tenochtitlan came at a cost, and that cost was often paid in blood. The romantic notion of a utopian Aztec society obscures the harsh reality of imperial domination. But hey, even the most thriving cities have their skeletons in the closet, right? In the residential quarters, life was a bit more down-to-earth, literally. The Aztecs lived in adobe homes, modest by today's standards but perfectly suited to the climate. These houses were typically built around central courtyards, offering a communal space for family life. It was a setup that fostered a strong sense of community and kinship, something modern urban sprawl often lacks. Yet, the residential areas were not just about communal living, they were also about status. The wealthier you were, the closer you lived to the center of the city. It was prime real estate politics, Aztec edition. Nobles lived in grander homes with multiple rooms and elaborate decorations, while the common folk made do with simpler abodes. This arrangement reflected the social hierarchy, a constant visual reminder of one's place in the pecking order. Despite the rigid class distinctions, the sense of community was pervasive. Markets weren't just places of trade, but social hubs where news, gossip, and ideas flowed as freely as the goods. In this way, the marketplaces were the social media of the Aztec world, minus the hashtags and selfies. It was here that the latest fashion trends, political news, and even matchmaking could occur. The economic prowess of Tenochtitlan was not just in its markets, but in its innovative methods of production and distribution. The chinampas we touched on earlier played a crucial role in this economic ecosystem. These floating gardens were not just agricultural innovations, but economic powerhouses, capable of producing surplus crops that fed the city and fueled trade. They were the greenhouses of their time, offering a sustainable solution to urban food production. And let's not forget the role of cacao beans, which were more than just a tasty treat. They served as a form of currency, a testament to their economic value. Imagine paying your taxes in chocolate. It's enough to make today's accountants cry into their spreadsheets. But this wasn't just a quirky economic system. It was a sophisticated monetary strategy that facilitated trade and commerce across the empire. As we wade deeper into the streets of Tenochtitlan, it's clear that the city was not just a collection of impressive buildings, but a vibrant organism pulsating with the rhythms of trade, culture, and society. This was a metropolis that managed to maintain order and prosperity without the crutch of modern technology. No GPS, no digital ledgers, just sheer human ingenuity and a dash of divine guidance. Yet, the question remains, how did they manage it all without the aids we consider essential today? The answer lies in the Aztecs' meticulous record-keeping and their use of visual symbols. The tlaquillos, or scribes, were the historians and accountants of their day, using pictographs to record everything from trade deals to historical events. It was a system that combined artistry with precision, ensuring that the city's affairs were documented and preserved. In many ways, the Aztecs were the ultimate pragmatists, balancing their grand visions with practical solutions to everyday problems. They remind us that great cities are built on more than just impressive structures. They're built on the networks of human interaction and the flow of goods and ideas. Tenochtitlan was a testament to the power of organization and the importance of community, a reminder that even in a city built on a lake, humanity can thrive if it dares to dream boldly and act wisely. As we prepare to explore further into the world of the Aztecs, we leave the bustling marketplaces and return to the quiet hum of Tenochtitlan's residential quarters. Here, the stories of everyday life, both grand and humble, continue to unfold. From the ingenious urban planning to the vibrant economic lifeblood, the city stands as a monument to human achievement and ambition. In the next part of our journey, we'll delve even deeper into the social fabric and cultural practices that define this remarkable society. For now, let's marvel at the intricate dance of commerce and community that kept the heart of Tenochtitlan beating strong. As we step away from the daily hum of Tenochtitlan's marketplace, let's dive into the Aztecs' infrastructural feats that were as much about survival as they were about spectacle. Picture this: an island city surrounded by water, yet the Aztecs faced a water supply problem. How's that for irony? But leave it to them to engineer a solution that was both practical and impressive. Enter the dikes and causeways, the unsung heroes of Aztec infrastructure. These were no ordinary constructs, they were the backbone of Tenochtitlan's connectivity and defense. The dikes, particularly the ones masterminded by Nezahualcóyotl in the mid-15th century, were designed to control the flooding of Lake Texcoco. This wasn't just about keeping their feet dry. It was a matter of life and death, a necessity to prevent the city from turning into Atlantis 2.0 every rainy season. The dike stretched over 16 kilometers, a formidable barrier against the whims of nature, showcasing an engineering prowess that would leave even modern civil engineers nodding in respect. Now, the causeways were something special too. These were the lifelines connecting Tenochtitlan to the mainland, spanning up to 11 kilometers and strategically placed to serve both commerce and military needs. Built with layers of stone and earth, they were sturdy enough to support the weight of armies and merchants alike. But here's the kicker: they included drawbridges, not just to let canoes pass underneath, but to act as a defensive measure. In times of war, these drawbridges could be lifted, effectively isolating the city from invaders. It was an ancient version of unfriending with a practical twist. The causeways were a testament to the Aztec strategic brilliance, serving as both thoroughfares and fortifications. But let's not gloss over the dual nature of these architectural feats. While they were marvels of civic engineering, they also symbolized the Aztecs' expansionist ambitions. You see, infrastructure wasn't just about making life easier, it was about control. The same structures that facilitated trade and travel also secured the empire's grip over its vast territories. The Aztecs were acutely aware that power wasn't just wielded through warfare, but also through the ability to move troops and resources quickly across their empire. The causeways and dikes didn't just keep the water at bay, they were tools of conquest, enabling the rapid deployment of armies to subjugate neighboring city-states. And while we're on the topic of dualities, let's ponder this. Were the Aztecs' architectural ambitions their greatest strength or their Achilles' heel? For all their grandeur, these structures required constant maintenance, a drain on resources and manpower. The very elements that made Tenochtitlan a bustling metropolis also made it vulnerable. The dikes and causeways were both a means of protection and a potential point of failure. If breached, they could spell disaster. The city's reliance on its infrastructure was a double-edged sword, its strength and its potential downfall. Speaking of downfalls, let's shift gears to the eventual decline of the Aztec Empire. The same architectural prowess that had built an empire also sowed the seeds of its demise. How, you ask? Well, maintaining such an elaborate system required a centralized authority and a compliant populace. But as the empire grew, so did the cracks in its foundation. The tribute system, while lucrative, bred resentment among subjugated peoples. And when Hernán Cortés arrived in 1519, he found allies among these disgruntled city-states, eager to topple the Aztec hegemony. It was as if the Aztec architects had unwittingly built a house of cards, beautiful and imposing, yet precariously balanced. Cortés didn't just exploit political fractures, he also used the very infrastructure of Tenochtitlan against its creators. During the infamous siege of Tenochtitlan, the causeways became choke points, and the city's reliance on its centralized systems turned into a liability. The Aztecs' intricate network of canals and causeways, designed to sustain life, became conduits of chaos as the city fell into disarray. Yet, even in its fall, Tenochtitlan's grandeur was undeniable. The Spanish conquerors were as much in awe as they were intent on destruction. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, one of Cortés's soldiers, marveled at the city's beauty, comparing it to the wonders of Europe. It was a bittersweet testament to the Aztecs' architectural genius. They had built a city so magnificent that even their conquerors couldn't help but admire it, even as they laid it to waste. But let's not romanticize the conquest too much. The fall of Tenochtitlan was a brutal affair, marked by starvation, disease, and bloodshed. The Aztecs' own infrastructure, once a symbol of their invincibility, became a stage for their tragic downfall. It's a stark reminder that in the grand theatre of history, the line between triumph and tragedy is often razor-thin. As we leave the shadows of Tenochtitlan's crumbling monuments, we're left to ponder the legacy of the Aztecs' architectural ambition. Their story is one of audacity and innovation, of beauty and brutality. It's a narrative that challenges us to consider how the very things that define a civilization can also lead to its undoing. In the end, the Aztecs remind us that greatness is often a delicate balance between dreaming big and staying grounded. They built a city on a lake, defied nature's odds, and left behind a legacy that continues to captivate us. Yet, their story is also a cautionary tale about the perils of overreach and the inevitability of change. So, as we prepare to delve deeper into the Aztecs' world, let's carry with us the lessons of their rise and fall. Their architectural marvels were not just structures of stone and earth, they were monuments to human ambition and the eternal dance between creation and collapse. In our next exploration, we'll uncover more about the social and cultural fabric that wove this incredible civilization together, leaving behind a tapestry rich in color, complexity, and contradiction. Stay tuned, the story of the Aztecs is far from over. As we dive further into the legacy of Aztec architecture, it's clear that their influence didn't just vanish with the Spanish conquest in 1521. In fact, the Aztec architectural legacy is a bit like those old rock bands, the ones that disband but never really leave the spotlight. The Spanish may have dismantled many of the grand structures, but they couldn't erase the cultural imprint the Aztecs left behind. Think of it as trying to erase a Sharpie mark with a pencil eraser. Not going to happen. The Aztecs' architectural genius left an indelible mark on modern Mexican identity, one that's still visible today in the country's rich cultural tapestry. Now, let's talk about the aftermath of the conquest. The Spanish, in their infinite quest for gold and glory, leveled Tenochtitlan, quite literally paving the way for Mexico City to rise from its ruins. It's a bit like building a condo complex over a historic site, swapping ancient grandeur for colonial ambition. The Templo Mayor, that soaring testament to the Aztecs' religious devotion, was buried beneath the colonial city. Yet, it's like the mythical phoenix. Its ruins were never completely forgotten. In the 1970s, while doing some routine work for the city's metro system, construction workers stumbled upon the remains of the Templo Mayor. Talk about a plot twist. It's as if the past refused to stay buried, thrusting itself into the present like a dramatic soap opera character. This discovery reignited interest in Aztec history and sparked a renewed appreciation for their architectural prowess. But here's the kicker. Despite the Spanish attempts to obliterate Aztec culture, the very foundation of modern Mexico City is intertwined with these ancient roots. It's a testament to the resilience of cultural identity, a reminder that history has a funny way of holding on to its secrets until it's ready to reveal them. Now, we can't ignore the romanticized image of Aztec ruins, often portrayed as mystical relics of a noble civilization. This narrative, while captivating, tends to overshadow the harsh realities of colonial destruction. The brutal dismantling of Tenochtitlan wasn't just a blow to the Aztec Empire, it was a cultural cataclysm. The systematic erasure of their structures was akin to tearing pages out of a history book, an attempt to rewrite the narrative to fit colonial ideals. But here's the rub. The more you try to erase a culture, the more it etches itself into the collective consciousness. In modern Mexico, the ruins of Aztec architecture serve as poignant reminders of resilience and resistance. They stand as silent witnesses to the enduring spirit of a people who, despite conquest and colonization, refused to be erased. The Templo Mayor, now a renowned archaeological site, draws thousands of visitors each year. It's as if the Aztecs are finally getting the standing ovation they deserved, albeit a few centuries late. These ruins are more than just tourist attractions, they're symbols of a complex history, bridging the gap between past and present. But the tale doesn't end with stone and mortar. The legacy of Aztec architecture continues to inspire and instruct in today's world. Urban planners and architects draw lessons from the Aztecs' ability to adapt to their environment, balancing aesthetics with functionality. The Chinampas, those ingenious floating gardens, are finding new life as a model for sustainable agriculture in urban settings. In a world grappling with climate change and food security, the Aztecs' innovations offer practical solutions that are as relevant today as they were centuries ago. Moreover, the Aztecs' understanding of space and symbolism resonates in contemporary architecture. Their use of astronomical alignments in structures like the Templo Mayor demonstrates a sophisticated grasp of how built environments can reflect cosmological beliefs. This concept is echoed in modern architectural designs that integrate natural elements and spiritual symbolism, proving that some ideas are truly timeless. In reflecting on the Aztecs' architectural legacy, it's crucial to acknowledge both the romance and the reality. Yes, their structures are awe-inspiring, but they also tell a story of human ambition, creativity, and resilience in the face of adversity. The Aztecs remind us that a civilization's greatness is measured not just by its achievements, but by its ability to endure and adapt. So, what do we take away from this journey through Aztec architecture? For starters, it challenges us to rethink our perceptions of history. The Aztec story is not just about what was lost, but also about what has endured. It's a powerful reminder that even in the face of destruction, cultural identity can survive, thrive, and continue to inspire future generations. The legacy of Aztec architecture is a testament to the enduring power of human ingenuity. A legacy that, much like a stubborn Sharpie mark, refuses to be erased. As we wrap up our exploration of the Aztecs' architectural marvels, let's carry with us the lessons of their resilience and innovation. Their story is a rich tapestry of myth and reality, a narrative that defies easy categorization. And while the physical structures may have crumbled, the spirit of the Aztecs lives on, etched into the very fabric of modern Mexico. It's a testament to the enduring power of history to shape identity, a legacy that continues to captivate and inspire. So, the next time you find yourself wandering through the bustling streets of Mexico City or marveling at the ruins of Templo Mayor, remember the Aztecs' audacity to build, to dream, and to leave a mark that time could not erase. In the grand narrative of history, they remind us that the stories we tell and the ones we choose to preserve define who we are and who we aspire to become. Now that's a legacy worth celebrating.